What up, everybody? This is Skobie Won, the beat some. I'm here with Mandy Moorhall and our special guest, Gabriel Kennedy, aka Prop Anon. And this is Dialogue with the Frogs, episode 3. Mandy, what you got to say?
I'm excited for this one, man. This is going to be a good one. We just found out that we've known each other forever and didn't know that we knew each other forever. And, you know, we probably knew each other in a past life, knowing the way the universe works. But, dude, I'm so excited to have you. We're making a tradition here where anytime I actually get to interview somebody, we ask them 2 questions to start. And the first one is the Cerberus question, which is really, really fun because, you know, we're here to talk about your book, you know, Chapel Perilous, the biography of Robert Anton Wilson. And this question was inspired by Robert Anton Wilson, and so few people get that. So this question was inspired by Robert Anton Wilson's comedy bit about King Kong's dong and how big King Kong's dong would have been, right? And how, you know, it's kind of people kind of ask, but they don't ask, and all of that. So I'm asking everybody who interviews on the Dialogue with the Frogs, in your opinion, how many penises does Cerberus have? 1, 3, or other?
Okay, yeah, this is you guys are going right to it right off the bat.
Off the bat.
All right, and then this is based on the premise of Kong's dong.
King Kong's dong, yeah. He had that bit about King Kong's dong and how big King Kong's dong was. So I thought about this question, and you know, it turns out no one's ever asked this question in the history of philosophy. So, you know, it was a question inspired by a satirical philosopher that inspired another satirical philosopher. So, you know, we would really like to know, you know, your question, or you can answer what you think Rob would have thought. So you can do it both ways, really.
Right. I mean, this is extra work now. All right. So
you could do some necromancy, you know?
Yeah, like let me channel Bob.
Yeah.
You think about this. Well, okay, I'll save his answer till after mine, right? Because I want to apply what I feel like I learned from writing this book, Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. And that's like, I have to sharpen my skills. Yeah. Shout out to the semiotic alchemist who made the cover, for real. Thank you. I got to, you know, personally really sharpen my own skills in science. Like reading Wilson, that was a pure reminder of like, learn the scientific method as much as you can, and you have to keep learning it and relearning it because our brain doesn't naturally kind of go to thinking like that. So for instance, Cerberus, right? 3-headed monster dog of hell, right? Yep. 3 heads, right? You think, okay, maybe we're talking multiple, but how many bodies does Cerberus have? How many paws? How many tails?
He's got multiple snake tails.
Oh man, okay. Now this throws some.
I know, yeah.
It works now. I didn't know this.
Multiple snake tails.
This is good. This is new information. I was gonna say 1 because of the body. You got 1 body. That's it, man.
Yeah, the Cerberesian cynics call that a monist.
All right.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of like the 3 branches of government. You know what I mean? 3 separate branches of government in 1 body. You know, yet right now there's just 1 dickhead who's trying to fuck up everything. You know,
absolutely.
So I'm just gonna go. I'm going Occam's razor, man. I'm in a very materialistic sort of phase these days. So no special magic for this little guy, Cerberus. He only gets 1.
Cerberus got 1. So you're on the record as a monist. That's great. Yeah. What do you think? So Raw,
Wilson says 2. Bob says 2.
That's a great answer.
I would.
Yeah. That's a great answer because it makes, you know, the 3 heads and the 2 makes 5. So he's got five heads total. I totally dig it. And I was anticipating that.
Right on.
Yeah,
that's what Bob said, man.
So Bob's a duelist. I love it.
That's great. And you actually met Bob, right? Which is super crazy to hear. Like you interviewed him. What was that? 2003? You said.
I interviewed him 2003. We didn't talk about how many penises Cerberus has.
Well, yeah,
that didn't come up.
Hell yeah, man.
But He did offer me Jameson at the beginning of the interview, and I wish I drank it with him, man, because I love Jameson, but I was way too nervous to. I didn't even have any like questions prepared, hardly, man. I just had
Crazy.
enthusiasm for his work, you know, and
Right.
That was July 24th, 2003. It was the day after the Maybe Logic, the live. It was a documentary based on his life, had premiered on July 23rd, 2003 in Santa Cruz. And I made kind of like a pilgrimage there to go specifically to see this and to see him speak. And then with the intention to interview him. And I arrived via Greyhound bus in Santa Cruz and then found a youth hostel. And the youth hostel was strange. They had weird rules. They had a 10 p.m. curfew. So if you weren't in the youth hostel at 10 p.m., they locked the doors and you couldn't get in, despite the fact that you paid money. Right. And then they made you leave during the day. So it was Santa Cruz was a very strange, weird town. Right. And so, but I found a way to sneak out of the youth hostel and to sneak back in to go see the movie because it went after 10 p.m. And after the movie, Bob did a Q&A and it was very funny. And then afterwards, I approached him, but I saw David J. Brown and I asked him, can you help me maybe interview Bob while I'm here? And then the next day I received an email from an email named Mark Chan at cruzio.net or something, which was an unusual name. I never saw it before, but it turns out this was Wilson's sort of nom de plume of internet, names for his email address. It was based after Mark Chain. And so he was like, yeah, I live in Capitola. Come on by at this time. And I was like, oh shit. And I was in like a cafe, some anarchist cafe in Santa Cruz, and on the internet when they had internet cafes. And I was like, I got to make it here. How am I going to do this? So quickly put it together. I took a bus to Radio Shack and I got one of the old school Radio Shack tape recorders, a little tiny microphone.
Right. Yeah.
And then I took a bus to Capitola, made it there, took a, what is it? A sub, they're not the subways, on the West Coast, it's sort of a different, just like a U-line sort of a train to a bus to his apartment. And at the time, Bob was in a wheelchair, but he made it a point to greet me standing up and kind of wobble his way back to his wheelchair from his sort of hallway that was about 10 feet into the living room space of this sort of modest, apartment, 2-bedroom apartment that overlooked Monterey Bay. It was a few floors up, had a nice little balcony. It was a very peaceful place for someone in their later years, right? And I was concerned for him because he was wobbling and shit. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, oh, what? And he was telling me as he was walking, he was like, yeah, I do this to keep my muscles working, because he had post polio at the time, which completely your leg muscles.
Yeah.
And he's like, I do this to keep my muscles working, but sometimes I fall and I can't get up. And if there's people around me, it embarrasses the hell out of them and they don't know what to do. And I was like, okay. And then he popped into onto the couch and he offered me some, would you like something to drink, some water, juice, Jameson? And again, I was far too nervous to, I wish I toasted some Jameson with him, but it was awesome nonetheless. And we spoke for about 2 hours, very conversational, had the little Radio Shack microphone, and hung out on the balcony afterwards. He was smoking a cigarette. And I asked him, I was like, yo, would you ever want to get on a track, a hip hop track, And he was like, sure, of course, man. He's like, I like hip hop music. He's like, I like the rhythm. It's, and then he said something from the 30s or something. He's like, it gets you out of the Tennyson A-B structure. I'm like, okay, that sounds good, and unfortunately, I didn't, that's one of my regrets. I didn't get Bob on a track, but fortunately though, the Legends Cold Cut, the British hip hop electronica duo who created Ninja Tune Records, Matt Black and his partner, man, they were able to get samples of Bob you know, and then they were able to utilize that and put that in their own track at Wilson's Electric Wake that happened in London after Bob died. So someone was able to sample Bob, and it was like the fucking Kings who were able to do it, because Cold Cut, they really blew up, you know, maybe a little bit before our time in a way, like in the 80s and whatnot, when they remixed Eric B. and Rakim's Paid in Full. But that's still one of the greatest remixes ever. And that was like the creation of this new sort of genre of like kind of electronica kind of remix sort of thing, I believe. So yeah, they're fucking great. They're legends. And so that day though, you know, speaking with Bob, we spoke about all types of things, and it was really nice to hang out with him, and, you know, left, went back to, took a bus from there, from Santa Cruz to Salt Lake City, because a buddy of mine was living out there. And I stayed at a youth hostel out there at first before staying at my friend's place. And that was another interesting youth hostel experience. The youth hostel in Salt Lake City was also a halfway house where like dudes in their 30s and 40s who were just getting out of prison were put in the youth hostel system. And I'd been to a lot of youth hostels in my, you know, earlier years, and I never encountered anything like this. Like, so I was sharing a room with, like, you know, dudes who just got out of jail and shit. And like, I was like, who are these old grizzled old dudes, man?
Crazy.
And like one day I came walking up to the youth hostel, and some guy was getting chased out by the guy who was running it because he was shooting up heroin in the bathroom and shit. And I was like, wow, Salt Lake City, I gotta get the fuck out of this youth hostel. And luckily I made it to my friend's place and was there for a few days. And I started transcribing the interview. And it took quite a long time to transcribe that interview way back 2003, because I had the Radio Shack fucking tape recorder and stuff. You know?
It still takes forever. Okay. I transcribed one of our 2-hour interviews. It took me fucking 3 weeks. So
yeah, it's quite a process, man. It definitely is. And it is something that that's sort of part of it, though. It helps you sort of, for me, it was a nice little thing, like a kind of listening again to what Wilson was saying. And in many ways, like that interview way back then is the seed of this biography. I mean, he literally is the first interview I did for his biography.
Do you still have the tapes? Have you put them out? That would be some shit.
Yeah, man. I have the tape. It's, you know, old, what is it? I don't even remember the names, man. What were the names?
Probably ADAT.
Yeah.
Audio to digital or something, Bose.
It wasn't ADAT at all. It was a cassette.
It wasn't ADAT? Yeah, okay. It was a cassette. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. We're going truly analog with it. And his voice was very, it's a little thin. It's a little, you know, in the headphones, if you will, because again, it was like the tiny microphone, bro.
Yeah, right.
It wasn't a clip mic. It was like an old.
Like, yeah. I remember that stuff.
Hell yeah, dude. That was awesome. All right. So we have a tradition of 2 questions. I want to ask you the second one. All right. If you could watch any comedy with any 3 people, alive or dead, what would you watch, and who would be in the room with you watching it?
All right. Well, so yeah, I thought about this question, and I must say, I'm not an absolutist. These things will change, but for today,
I agree.
I want to see American Psycho. I consider that a great comedy. Three Amigos, the classic film with Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, and this cult hit called The Search for One-Eyed Jimmy, which is a movie starring Sam Rockwell, Samuel L. Jackson, Steve Buscemi. It's sort of like a Brooklyn movie, really, really funny movie. And I think I would want to watch it with, obviously, Robert Anton Wilson. I'd like to smoke some weed with that dude, drink some Jameson this time. You know, this guy, Frankie Quinones, he was in the show called This Fool on Hulu. He's a comedian. I think he's a really funny guy. He's got this character he does called Creeper,
Okay.
Yeah, he's really funny, man. And then Maria Bamford.
Hell yeah.
Do you know her?
Hell
I
yeah.
feel like she does a lot of voices and stuff. I feel like she'd be funny to
Yeah,
listen
she
to.
didn't she do a whole comedy special where she was like in her living room with her parents? Was
Something
that
like
her? Like
Yeah.
she does them in like really crazy places, like yeah, and like talks about her mental health and how she's like a crazy person and like
Oh,
really
yeah.
makes it
Yeah.
absolutely hilarious. She's great. And her
She
voices
is.
are awesome. That would be a good room.
Yeah, man. You know, a lot of voices, you know, between Frankie and Maria. They do different characters and shit, you know.
Oh man, I bet Ross got his own too. That would be an interesting conversation. You know what I mean? Like you'd have to be stopping whatever you're watching every 2 minutes. You know what I mean? They would just go off and oh man, that would
You
be
know, I had no idea he did like stand up until you said that with your interview with sorry, the guys who wrote the forward. I can't see it. There we go. Grant Morrison and Douglas Ruskin. Sorry,
read it
Rushkoff?
off the screen.
Well, no, you moved it too fast. I can't read that fast.
You're
I have glasses.
fine.
My eyes don't adjust so fast. But anyways, I watched one today where it was like, this is clearly a stand-up bit, and he's just like riffing about religion and just going and going. And I never caught on to that until you said something. I was like, holy shit, this is exactly what he's doing. You know, like it's, but he presents himself as an intellectual, like, and it's like, how many of those people are doing that type of stuff? You know, I just didn't get it until you said that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, completely. I mean, like that's an interesting thing about Wilson as a lecturer, if you will. That sort of line that he walks between giving a lecture and then giving sort of a performance. He definitely was, you know, very structured in knowing what he was going to speak about beforehand. He seemed like he was someone who was always very well prepared in terms of like, he one time said that he thought that maybe he might have had Asperger's, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
he's sort of on the spectrum of like this sort of autistic Asperger's. Like, you know, he edited his books a lot, even though there are a lot of misprints here and there and things that are off. It's an interesting, his mind is interesting, but when it comes to, you know, giving these talks and lectures, he was very well structured. So, and they did roll off. He used a lot of humor, you know, and he parallels well with George Carlin a lot because there's a lot of similarities. But I noticed Wilson in a lot of his live talks, especially when you watch them from the 80s, those are really mostly the ones that are online a lot into the 2000s, up to his like best his best lecture / stand-up ever, which was, I wrote about it in my book, the pro-con that he spoke at, where he was then fired from the Prophets Conference. And that lecture is pure gold, man. That's on YouTube right now. You can watch that. And it's comedy gold in the sense that just like the jokes that he's laying down, it is stand-up. But it's in the realm of George Carlin. You put those two guys together, and in that regard, there's a new type of comedy that's born, right? And Lenny Bruce, of course, is part of that. But Bruce is challenging obscenity laws. And of course, I mean, he's a great storyteller, but like then you put Carlin in there, storyteller's great. Wilson, amazing storyteller. And then you have this kind of, you know, tripartite, you know, the holy trinity of like really interesting philosophical comedy. And but so when Bob would get on stage, it'd be a joke, usually about the current presidential election or something like that, or who was currently elected president. You know, when George Bush was elected president, he had things to say about the names of, you know, President Bush and Vice President Quayle, like Bush and Quayle. And he's like, what the time I'm living in? When I was a kid, these were names for like sexual organs, man, Bush and Quayle, like, and these are our presidents right now, you know, like for him, this was sort of mind blowing. Imagine what he would think of today. He is on record saying that Trump is batshit crazy.
Good. We have to look that one up. That's,
you know, And but yeah, man, he had I think it was just, again, he had that notion of hilaritas. He liked to tell jokes, and it was a great way of engaging the audience, really. But it was also something that I think kept him, sort of outside of the academy, if you will. And
Right.
we're in a totally different time. Like the walls of the academy and the notion of what is an outsider, especially in American art and literature, it's like barely exists anymore, like outsider art, like, or it does. We're just not going to hear about it until like 20 years from now or something, and maybe that's the way it always is. But in other words, the academy has taken on these things that Wilson obviously was writing about 50 years ago. But as far as like his humor and his jokes, like that's hard to emulate. It's hard to be that funny. You have to craft. You have to hone a craft of stand-up, and Wilson was able to do that. Like, was he able to maybe hold a career as a stand-up comedian strictly? Maybe he would be better than Timothy Leary. Leary kind of tried it, but Leary's, yeah.
I really think he could have. Honestly, I was listening to Religion for the Hell of It today, and I only made it about 5 minutes into it, and it was clearly like, oh, this is a whole riff. And it's an hour and a half long. Like, he's just going and going, and it was like none of it was. I don't know. I'm sure he like pre-planned it, obviously, but like the way he rolled from one kind of idea to the next, it wasn't as if he was doing some presentation on something. You know what I mean? It was very much comedy. It was funny, and even in the background, it says like comedy, and then it says live, and I can't tell where it is, but. Like, I was like, holy shit, I would not have known that if I didn't pick up your book and started digging into this shit,
Yeah, man. Yeah, that Religion for the Hell of It talk, though, I think that was in Denver in the late 80s and whatnot.
Yeah.
That was, Bob in the 80s, too, was influenced by the Church of the Subgenius.
Right.
And I'm sure he was an influence on them as well, because Discordianism was an influence on them. So, those are sort of the flavors, right? And I mention all that because where it all, where things have gone to where we are today. I mean, we were speaking about 4chan before we hopped on here, and I watched an interesting documentary just the other night that kind of went into the quick history of 4chan and seeing like footage of their first conference, if you will, and the behavior of them, and everyone being like, oh, fucking memed out or whatever. The fun in being kind of trollish. Like when I look at old Church of the Subgenius footage, there's a similar vibe. I'm not saying Church of the Subgenius is responsible for this 4chan behavior or whatever, but like they touch on that, like how these tropes get reborn every generation. But it's a very interesting time that we're in right now, where these sort of tropes that were used by Bob and others that were kind of liberatory have been inverted in many ways and used by people that just kind of continue a cult of bullshit, which is really what it's supposed to be, the complete opposite. Like, get the fuck out of all cults,
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
let me tell you a little funny lore about a 4chan and my, like, what I'm infamous for. You probably don't know this, but I write about it in the book. I'm the inventor of Rickrolling. I invented Rickrolling in the year 2001, making fun of the hardcore punk band 25 to Life. And the singer,
Rick to life.
Rick to life, right? So what I used to do was go to
he's from Connecticut. Yeah,
I used to go to hardcore shows and leave fake cassette tapes and CDs that would say 25 to life, and then something ridiculous like Jamie Josta on saxophone 1994, right? Just leave them like in the bathroom, like all over the place. And I've done this in all 50 states. I've done it in Puerto Rico, Guam. I've know people who have taken it to a couple places in Europe. So this joke has gotten around. But if you put one of these CDs into your CD player, what you get was one song of 25 to Life, and then the rest of it would be Never Gonna Give You Up for the entirety of the CD. So I was doing the Rick roll, making fun of Rick to life. it was the bait and switch on the Ricks, right? So and then Kaza came out and I did it on Kaza, and then 4chan, and then I took it to 4chan, and then it just exploded. And next thing I know, it's on the Macy's Day Parade. But yeah, I invented that shit, making fun of Rick to Life at the LNG in New London. So like I don't know. It's like all these years later, it's hilarious that like, and that came out of this meme, like early internet kind of meme culture stuff that was very much inspired by Raw and inspired by the Church of Subgenius and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It was like a very practical chaos apple that I could leave laying around punk shows, that if you knew, you knew, and if you didn't, joke's on you, fucking, but they can't take a joke. So yeah, I used to do the same thing to the band Screwdriver. So if you were
Right.
a person that was inclined to download a Screwdriver song on Kazaa or LimeWire, what you would actually end up downloading was the band Swerve Driver. Very, very, very different. Very, very different band. So fast forward 15 years later, Johnny and I have a buddy who's a producer for somebody one step removed from Kanye West. And they're in a recording session. And Kanye West goes, "Hey, check out this band Screwdriver. I'm going to sample them for my next album." He hits play, and it's the band Swerve Driver. So all these years later, my anonymous chaos apple that is threw out there ends up paying off with Kanye West, and same thing with Rick rolling. And I was like, all right, man, like I haven't even graduated high school. It's time to retire from this. I'm gonna move on to other stuff.
Damn, bro, props. You are like a true Discordian saint, my friend.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I was turning me down, Johnny. Okay,
Oh, my bad. Sorry, I hit the wrong one.
Check 1 2. Yeah, man. I mean, I got into Discordianism and stuff in 2003 at a anti-war protest. So there was a couple years there before I actually knew about any of that stuff that like I was carrying on in that tradition, just because I was doing pranks and all sorts of stuff like that way before. So so even as a kid, like there was an interview with me just messing with the guy who was doing like some like alien stuff. Like he said, like aliens were at this particular native site in Connecticut. And I went there when I was a kid. And he interviewed me when I was 10. I made up this like entire thing about a spinning soup can in the sky and all this shit. And he published that. And I was like, why didn't you tell your audience that your source is a 10-year-old kid that's screwing with you, right? So this 10 years old, somebody published this nonsense that I had. So 3 years later, for me to invent Rickroll, like it's no brainer, right? And then I find myself at an anti-war protest in the year 2003. I see a bunch of people that are dressing up, putting on makeup as clowns. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to go see what the clowns are doing at this anti-war protest. And I recognize this girl that I met at shows and stuff. She goes, oh, yeah, we go to protests and we mess with the cops dressed up as clowns and yada, yada, yada. Fuck them if they can't take a joke. And they all went, fuck them if they can't take a joke. And I was like, what did I just step into? And I started hanging out with her, and she's telling me all about Raw and about Subgenius and, showing me all the lore and going back. And I was like, holy shit, these are my people. This is what I did. Like, this is like my thing, and that was 2003. I don't know how many years ago that was, So how the hell did
was
you
that
get
your
into
introduction into Raw? Was that
2003? Yeah, at an anti-war protest with a bunch of with the troop of clowns, dude. Nice. That's how I got into it. And that was at 2003. I was 14.
Yeah, right.
So it was like the right time to and I read everything when I was in high school from the But how the hell did you get into it? Like, how young were you? Like, what was your intro into all this? Like
I was in high school.
Like how did it end up? How did you end up being the guy that wrote the biography? Like, what's your journey with all this stuff, man?
Yeah, same. I was in high school. I was senior year of high school, math class. My buddy, who I went out to link up with in Salt Lake City, actually, after I interviewed Bob, he was the guy that introduced me to Bob. A guy named Bradley Sands. He's a bizarro fiction writer, very hilarious writer. So check him out. And he always read these these wild books, man. Like he brought in like Finnegan's Wake one day, and I was like, I'd of course heard of Joyce. I tried reading the Dubliners, and I was like, whoa, what the fuck is that? He brought in Finnegan's Wake, and then he had a fucking Oxford English dictionary. So 2 fucking giant books in the back of this math class, where the teacher really struggled to teach us. Yeah, man, that Joseph Campbell. Yeah, that's a great book, man. Yeah. But one day, you know, dude brought in Illuminatus, and it was the cover with the awesome pyramid with the eye in it, and the dolphin jumping over the pyramid, and the checkerboard. Yeah, I like that cover too. Yeah. Checkerboard design, and I was like, what the fuck is this, dude? Let me check that out. And I read the back cover, and it you know, basically described sort of like a detective novel, which I liked, sort of true crime detective novels. 2 detectives are, you know, seeing what's up with the bombing of a radical left newspaper, and then all unfolds. They find out about this secret society that's been running the world for the last however 100 years. And then I read the you know, the first quote of the book, which was, you know, a quote from Ishmael Reed's book Mumbo Jumbo, that said, like, the true history of the world is the history of or I don't have it off the top of my head, but like the warfare between secret societies, plural, right? And that got my brain working, and I was like, even to think about like a secret society that controls everything in the world that matters behind the scenes, you know, at 17 or 18, I was like, I don't know, really, you know. And it's like a skepticism that's different than a skepticism that comes years later, you know, but it's still the same skepticism of like, that doesn't seem feasible. But then that quote, which was, you know, multiple secret societies battling with each other behind the scenes, to me, that was like, well, that makes a little more sense, right? And,
absolutely.
You know, I was listening to I was always a fan of hip hop, so, you know, I was listening to like, you know, like Queen's hip hop shit, a lot of, and there was always like, don't trust shit, right? And so, and that kind of sparked it off. I read the book that summer, and I, you know, like so many kind of people like that really get into Bob, like it was like he quickly became my favorite writer. You know, at the time I was reading Henry Miller, the Beats, you know, Jack Kerouac. I read a lot of Burroughs. I had like written a paper, you know, like a school paper for about Burroughs, and I got really into like the notion of the cut up method and the third mind, and like, you know, what does this say about perception? And then of course at that time, you know, I was reading then Cosmic Trigger and Prometheus Rising. And Wilson, perception is like a major part of Wilson's work. And even in Illuminatus, you know, where Hagbard Shalene does these sort of magic tricks on people, it plays with people's perception. And, you know, just like you, Mandy, you know, I think it was, you know, you're younger, you're interested in pranks. And there was this book put out by Research. Research used to put out, it was an awesome publication, like V Vale. I don't know if it's Vicky Vale, but V Vale was one of the main, it's probably not Vicky Vale, but V Vale.
It sounds very familiar though.
Yeah, Research books. You guys, I recommend people to research because like for many years, these were the books that you get at Tower Records, right? And like Wilson's books were always in Tower Records, not so much like Barnes and Nobles. And at the time, Barnes and Nobles and Tower Records were, you know, adjoined stores, or, you know, next to each other. And I would just fucking smoke mad weed in the parking lot, and then like swerve on over to Tower, you know, Barnes and Nobles, but then Tower Records. And in the back of Tower Records were all the books. So there was like Crowley, Leary, Wilson, McKenna, and then Research magazine, and then all this other wild shit, like books about Genesis Peorage or whatever. And that was at Tower Records, yeah. And so, you know, it's just very organic, really, my interest in Wilson's work, because it was part of a large milieu of sort of like this education that you provided yourself. And it was rooted in this sort of, you know, or at least heavily influenced by this notion of the 1960s counterculture, but then also infused with like the 1990s counterculture, because the whole notion of that counterculture really imploded, if you will, or like collapsed in itself with the birth of like really the internet and like social media, just completely like, that's why everything doesn't make sense today. Like,
Right.
in my opinion, it's another turn in the overall cycle, you know, and where signs and symbols, it's also a sign of Chapel Perilous, because what we'd once thought a signifier that thought made sense to us is completely different now. So we have to get hip to and get rooted in the moment and really understand. So like one instance is RFK Jr. is in the White House, like, and for so long the Kennedy name in America, you know, was like revered because of the Kennedy brothers who got their brains blown out because they were like in for the good fight. And then along comes the demented son of one of them who likes to put, you know, who blended like live rodents to feed for his falcons with, you know, some who's shooting heroin with his cousin's addicted to heroin, you know what I mean? Like, and he's the head of the health ministry now.
He's
You know
the guy, and he's got a worm in his brain.
Oh yeah, I heard that's great too.
He's got a worm in his brain.
But he's
man.
also been sober for like 40 years. So like,
yeah, but he's got a worm in his brain.
I mean,
Yeah. No, but you're right on that, Scoobs, man. I'm talking smack, but the fact that
no, I'm just
dude did get sober though, for real. No, I have to give props to that. But he doesn't seem to be working any side of program though. Like, anyway.
yeah. No, do you hold on, I had a really good one and I lost it because I was actually really getting into your story there. But it was like what so nobody asked this question, but what does Chapel Perilous mean? Because my background, Mandy would just sorry, gave your government away. He would just turn on Raw in the background while we're working on books or on music and stuff. And the first one he ever turned on was him smoking a joint with this other dude on stage. And they literally just like passed it back and forth. I still don't know what they were ever talking about, but like it was fascinating. It was just like, okay, like what the hell is this? Like what does Chapel Perilous mean? Is that something that Raw had like as an idea, or was it something you came out of from his ideas? Or
yeah, it's the title of the book is rooted in Wilson used the term mostly in the book, his book. Yeah, there it is. Wilson, excuse me.
He's got a cough.
Wilson used the term a lot in his book Cosmic Trigger Volume 1.
Okay.
And that was to describe sort of like a sort of mental state that he had entered that was triggered by all this sort of, you know, what we would call today like psychonautical research, this kind of exploration of his, you know, antipodes of the mind, utilizing a lot of psychedelics, thelemic magic, Jungian psychology, and you know, Leary's 8-circuit model of intelligence. He was, you know, doing a lot of self-exploration, you know, in the early 70s. And he used the term to describe a mental state where events that occur, it becomes difficult to determine what the cause is. Is the cause from something, you know, material or some supernatural force, i.e., you know, magic, right? Or telepathy, ESP. Wilson was also exploring a lot of quantum entanglement. You know, the ontological implications of quantum physics was a very fiery subject at the time when Bob was exploring it with a small group of particle physicists in Berkeley. And Wilson, you know, was sort of associated with that crew too. So he is utilizing the term Chapel Perilous to make sense of all this sort of fringe research that he was doing that was involving, you know, in-depth, you know, psychological studies of himself. So a book like Cosmic Trigger then is a textbook on self-initiation, if you will, because if you take a magical path, you're doing your own interior psychological work, right? And this is sort of like his own sort of textbook of how to achieve certain states of mind. And when you are in this place that he had entered, where he believed that he was at the time receiving telepathic messages emanating from the Sirius constellation, you know, way out and fucking wherever it is in outer space. But the great thing about Cosmic Trigger and why Bob is such an interesting writer is that book is a personal journalistic book. It's an example of new journalism that writers like Norman Mailer and Tom Wolfe, the writer of the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, and others of that generation created, where the journalist is the center of the story. And of course, Hunter S. Thompson is the gonzo god of new journalism. And Norman Mailer once said, you know, he tells lies to tell the truth. Well, that's through this sort of, you know, lens, right? But Bob takes a piece of that, he calls it guerrilla ontology, right? And he's the center of the story, say like in Cosmic Trigger. And and a crux of it is this notion of what's causing all this wild stuff to happen, you know, in my life or around me. And an example of that wild stuff was his spontaneously achieving remote viewing, if you will, of his son Graham on numerous occasions, right? Doing this sort of money magic ritual to receive a check from a publisher who was withholding payment, and then this working. So him taking this sort of magical path and, you know, checking to see what's happening. Is it all bullshit or is there something to it? And he found that, oh, wow, there's something to this, and this magical, you know, path. And he was, you know, and this is the long answer to your question, but like for him, Chapel Perilous means sort of like an initiatory stage, right? Where if you are on a path like this, a certain, you know, dangerous path, if you will, you're inevitably going to enter this frame of mind where it's like, where the fuck is this causing? You know, I mean, what's causing this, right? So, but also in my book, I apply Chapel Perilous. You know, I kind of zoom the lens back a little bit, and you know, it's Wilson's whole life, right? Like this path through Chapel Perilous, right? He borrows the term from, it originally is used in a 15th century poem that's in the, you know, the Arthurian mythos, the Arthurian legend mythos, you know, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. It's a poem called The Death of Arthur, you know, written by Thomas de Malory. And it's in that poem where the Perilous Chapel, or the Chapel Perilous, is first mentioned. Really? And it's all part of the Grail Quest legends, you know, where, you know, the Knights of the Round Table all go off on separate quests to find the Holy Grail. Parsifal, of course, goes off on his quest, and he encounters the Fisher King. One telling of the tale, I don't know if it's Lancelot. It could be Lancelot. Is he gets sucked into the Chapel Perilous while looking for the Holy Grail, and the Chapel Perilous is a physical location in this tale. Then it's an actual place, and in that place, everything is inverted. It's a horror show. You know, it's the chapel itself, and there's different sort of descriptions of it, because that's what's really fun about the Arthurian mythos is it's sort of like the original comic books. It's like this original fan fiction where, you know, this universe is being built by all these different writers over, you know, generations. So different iterations of the story get told, but the source again is Thomas de Malory's 15th century poem, and it is about, you know, one of the brave knights who, and a lot of it is about healing, you know, when Parsifal, he has to heal the Fisher King, or that's what he ends up doing, healing the Fisher King, and Lancelot heals another knight who was, you know, mortally wounded, and part of the healing is he gets a piece of cloth of a knight that was killed in the Chapel Perilous and brings it back out and helps heal his brother, right? And so this, I think, is pretty fitting in some ways for, you know, Wilson's life. It's somewhat, you know, tropically similar to like the notion of a Bodhisattva vow, if you will, that like, you know, no one here gets out alive, so you might as well help some people before you go.
Totally.
You know? And I think Wilson was dedicated to that. And I wanted to, obviously it's a cool phrase too. So I think that it pretty much encapsulated, we're all walking through Chapel Perilous in our lives, man. We encounter all these moments, what Stan and Christina Groff call spiritual emergencies. So I don't want to, take away the magic from how Bob used the term Chapel Perilous, because he used it for a specific moment in time that people encounter really weird shit, whether it was seeing UFOs or manifesting, evoking, images, or encountering mimetic entities or magical entities or whatever, people they will see a fairy here and there. They will see the puka, or they will see, and they won't know how to make sense of that. So Bob specifically is using it for stuff like that, but it is a phrase that is very applicable to our whole lives, man. We're all seeking, the grail, if you will, and we're going to encounter the Chapel Perilous. And yeah, it seems like, we're all collectively, the world is in a Chapel Perilous right now too. So
it's the Alice Wonderland fucking Willy Wonka shit, man. That's just
and the name for that piece of cloth that was brought back from the Chapel Perilous is the towel of Minerva. So that was Minerva's towel that was recovered from the Chapel Perilous. In case anybody's wondering, is Mandy actually that clever where all of this ties in? Yes, actually I am that clever. And there's double and triple entendres there with the towels and all of that.
I heard that too. Like if it kind of plays a Rick Astley song if you put it on a.
Yeah. It depends on what it is that what it is you cleaned before that. You know what I mean? You might end up with the Rick to Life song. Really, if you use it to wipe your ass, that's how you end up with the Rick to Life song.
That's how you get pink eye.
There you go, John. Hell yeah, man. That was great, dude. All right.
How long did it take you you've been working on this since 2003? Is that what I gather? Or you kind of had it sitting around from your other conversation, and you were kind of working on it for a while and then it just kind of flowed? Is that what I gather?
Well, 2003, I would say the sort of official start was late 2015.
Okay.
Biography itself.
Yeah.
When 2003, I was like, really still researching and reading, trying to read everything that Wilson wrote. And then in 2004, Wilson started the Maybe Logic Academy, which I was a part of, and that was like a master's degree in like Wilson's work. It was really cool, sort of online laboratory, really. And but by the time when he died in 2007, in January 2007, I was like, all right, man. Like I knew, I was already doing music and I was writing a lot. I was writing articles for various online outlets and stuff like that. And my aim, of course, was to write a book. I was like, yo, man, I'm gonna write a fucking book, and there was multiple kind of like starts and stops. So between like say 2000, I really only got serious maybe 2014, 2012, right before 2000. Yeah, it was around the time of Occupy, actually.
Right.
I really started like getting into crafting a book per se. And so it kind of took 3 iterations, and those 3 books were kind of more about his ideas. And I told myself, I was like, man, I got to make Wilson's ideas kind of shift and change a little bit over time. So I started the biography just as a spine to kind of chart his sort of movements in space and time, and cross-reference that with what was on his mind at that time. And I wanted to know, like, well, where was Bob physically when he had that July 23rd, 1973 experience with Sirius and whatnot? Where was he located? Because he never really says that in Cosmic Trigger exactly where. So this all just came out of an interest, man. Like he moved around a lot. I wanted to know where exactly he was. And and that became The Spine, and that was late 2015. And then I got a first of 2 book deals for the book in spring 2016. And then that was it, man. That was the start. And it rolled out in stages, you know, like the first stage was interviews. And it started with doing weekly interviews for quite a while with Wilson's daughter, Bob and Arlen Wilson's daughter, Christina Pearson, who is she runs the Raw estate. She's the head of it. And she also runs the Hilaritas Press, which is about Wilson's books. So, yeah, I interviewed her for quite a while, over a year, I think, like almost every week or something like that. And that was great. So she provided a certain biographical spine. And the whole time too, then it was, the 3 stages of interviews and trying to interview as many people who are as close to Bob as possible, the concentric circles, you know? So I interviewed all his surviving children, which was Christina, Graham, and Alex, and then on out to people who are friends, et cetera, and then people who were influenced by him. So that ran the gamut, from people who knew him, like Scott Appel or Saul Paul Sarag, or then people who like were into him, like Grant Morrison, who had like great stories, and Morrison, yeah, he was dope as shit, man. He was we met up physically to do the interview, man. We linked up, like no one like offered that like along the whole time. Not like that was like asking anyone to do that, but I just thought it was very generous of the guy's time. And then primary sources, like I've read as many of Wilson's articles as I could, like stacks of them. And then correspondence. This took a bit of work, collecting as much of Wilson's correspondence that he was engaged in over the course of his 40+ year career. And that was an interesting journey because that involved reaching out to these various libraries and special collections in archives in these libraries all across the United States, and then individuals who had private archives. That took some time.
How many private archives could there be?
There were 2 private archives. One was the Discordian archives.
Adam Gorightly.
I received some from Adam Gorightly. Exactly. Yep. He sent me some nice letters, correspondence between Wilson and Greg Hill and Robert Shea, Kerry Thornley and Wilson. Some really cool stuff.
That really surprised me when I read your book that Kerry Thornley and Raw only met once in person. The rest of it was all, just is that. Did I read that wrong, or is that? No,
you read that right.
Yeah. I thought because I thought it was like they were like great friends. They were hanging out all the time, like cross paths all the time, or something like that. Like, oh, I'm gonna be in this town, you're in that town, let's hang out. Like they didn't even have that kind of. They just hung out once.
Really?
Yeah, and he was. I just it's like the internet before the internet kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It wasn't quite as easy to just be like, yo, let's link up. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, that was okay. So that source is Jesse Walker's book. I know this. The United States of Paranoia. Who I just interviewed for my podcast by him. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you bang all you want, dude. Just
plug it.
Plug it all.
He's a very interesting writer. That book is very, very interesting in terms of Wilson studies, if you will. So he writes a little bit about Kerry Thornley and Bob in his book. And that's where that comes from, is that they met up in the late 60s. I think it was around 1968 when Thornley was living in Florida. Bob was there and they were smoking a joint together. And that's when Bob asked, he's like, if the Illuminati really does exist, they'd probably be pretty pissed off at us right now. Don't you think? Like everything that we're doing. And maybe, and Thornley was like, this sort of like sober one in that stoned out conversation, and he was like, which is ironic seeing where Thornley ends up.
Yeah.
And he's like, nah, man. He's like, if the Illuminati exists, they don't even give a shit about us.
Nope.
Man. You know?
That's the truth, though. They do not give a fuck.
Yeah.
If they exist, they do not give a fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the prerequisites for the Illuminati, right? Is not giving a fuck about
It's
everyone
so,
else.
it's very Metal Gear Solid. Like, I don't know. Like this stuff is so deep. And Mandy just throws me into it, and I have to like swim my way out of the bucket and try to understand any of it.
That's half the fun of the experience.
Well, that's
you know
exactly
what I mean?
that's all that's the whole
You know,
point, right?
a lot of the time we'll be like, you know, doing writing sessions, or he'll be like reading something. Hey, did you know about this? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's already in the book. And I flip to the book to the page, and he goes, how is that already in the book? And I'm just now finding out about this. You know, and that's sort of our like the relationship. It's sort of the vibe of the show that we're putting on is like my brother genuinely doesn't know anything about what the book is about or like its influences. So this show is a way of him to learn about the book that he wrote. You know? So like it's you know, and this is like really cool because he gets to learn about like the lore of the lore behind the lore and like the reason why we say some of the things the way we say them. Right. You know, like in the book, I literally have a Burroughs-esque cut up of Robert Anton Wilson's work.
I remember that.
Is it Prometheus Rising? The Eighth Circuit one.
Yeah, he gets into the Eighth Circuit in Prometheus Rising.
Okay, yeah. So in Prometheus Rising, I take every time that he mentions a dog.
Yeah, right.
Because our book is about Cerberus. Anytime he mentions a dog, I clip it. Boom, 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 and I turn that into a Burroughs-esque cut up. And it's like, you know, it's like that's the type of like fun art that we're doing.
The whole time I'm like, what are we doing? And he's like, oh, we're literally reading through raw stuff, and I didn't even know what it was at this point. And he's just like, all right, so we're gonna take any time he mentions dogs, and we're gonna clip it, and we're gonna include it, and then we're gonna include it into a one long run-on sentence. And I'm like, why are we doing that? And I was like, hold on, who's gonna read this? Like, who wants to read one long run-on sentence? And he's like, oh, you'll get it, And I'm like, all right, okay, let's just do it. Like, I had to like turn off my inhibitions at some point and just kind of fucking run with it, you know. And the more I'm glad I did, because the more that I get into it, I'm like, okay, this is fucking crazy. Like, I have no idea some of this stuff is in here, you know, and it's Raw is fascinating. He is absolutely. Oh yeah, that one, right? It's hard to read.
Can you see it?
No, wait, hold on. Yeah.
Curated quotes from Robert Anton Wilson.
All right, yeah.
And it's on page 47.
Okay.
But anyway, I just took every time that he mentions a dog, and you know, it starts with "Run, puppy, run. Yonder comes the big dog. Run, puppy, run." A children's rhyme, and that's just like it's right there, you know. And I just took every single time, you know, and it's just taking that. It's taking his influences and applying it to his work. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
So Burroughs applied to Raw ends up the Towel of Minerva, you know. And you know, our little community, we were joking that like the Towel of Minerva, we put it out every 73 days, which is, you know, fun. Makes 5 per season, and that's a homage to some sort of a calendar that was in a book. I don't so you know exactly. So you know, it's like if you get why we put the book out every 73 days, you're already kind of in on the joke, you know, and you're like prepared to see all the other jokes, and it allows us to introduce you to all of these other ancient Greek jokes that you might have missed. You know what I mean? Like anybody that's, you know, a fan of Raw and can see, you know, our background right there and knows how important Finnegan's Wake is. I want to show you page 4 of Finnegan's Wake. It says right there, you can see it underlined. Ooh, come on.
There you go. Hold on. You got to hold it still.
You move your face. Your face is in the way.
Pull it back. There it goes. Oh, you got your copy?
No, check that out. Look at that. It says Brekka coax, coax.
Yeah.
And it's right there on page 4. So you only needed to make it 4 pages in to have, you know, that ingrained in you. Like, you know, Joyce was on that ancient Greek tip, right? He was like on that stuff. So right in page 4, he throws Aristophanes at you. And Joseph Campbell, his explanation, because, you know, the book is kind of taking it line by line. his explanation for Breccia coax being there is pretty disappointing. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, Campbell, you had to know that that's a reference to Aristophanes. Why'd you leave that out of the book? Why didn't you tell your audience that, oh, this comes from Aristophanes, the frogs, yada, yada. So, you know, my book being, you know, this kind of milieu, I wanted to kind of correct a little bit of what, you know, was in this one, right? So, you know, we're playing with the text that Wilson played with and trying to do it in a way that's like authentic, where one of our people in our community, her name's Raw Path, she was like, hey, is the Towel of Minerva basically just volume 4 of like it's a continuation of the trilogy? And I was like, yeah, it's pretty much that. And it's like community built, and it goes on canonically until the year 3027, when the, you know, muse of our book, Medea, goes on a trip to Mars to attend the Deltron 3030 festival, because it's a 3-year trip. That's the safest way. So she's going to the Deltron 3030 festival on Mars. So we have the Towel of Minerva in its entirety from the first issue all the way until the year 3027. And, you know, that's canonical, right? So it's a continuation of the Illuminatus trilogy. It's volume 4. And because we were able to do this hyperstition magical ritual where we're playing with these texts in such a way, we're able to basically continue that legacy until at least 3027. And then there we've lost contact. But, you know, we have it in its entirety. And it's actually the Voynich manuscript. You're familiar with the Voynich manuscript? It's this ancient. It's this text from the 1400s that has all these naked women and like series of pipes, and it's written in this language that's indecipherable.
Right.
So, you know, our contacts on Mars, Arcturus and Sentinel Vega, they transmitted the book in its entirety, but they sent it 1% too far in the past. So we have it in its entirety. It's the Voynich manuscript. And then, you know, they resend it to us every 73 days, which allows us to put out an issue.
I love
every
it.
73 days. So
it's literally 1 degree on the, you know, the scale. It's in Yale, New Haven.
Oh yeah. The actual text, the Voynich manuscript text is one
wow.
degree on the, you know, latitude away from us.
Right.
And they sent it 1 degree too far back in the past.
The,
so, you know, it's this cosmic joke that Arcturus is playing on us, you know. So we're taking all that stuff and continuing it. You know, it's all in the book, and we have until the year 3027 to publish it, because, you know, then Medea went to Mars and hung out at the Deltron 3030 festival, and who knows what happened to her after that.
Yeah, man. No, I want to read it.
Yeah, man, it's all in there, and, you know, you're more than welcome to contribute it for the Chorus of Frogs. Now that you're a frog, you know, you're one of the Chorus of Frogs. So we're always taking contributions, and anybody who wants something published, you know, just email it to us, and, you know, we'll put it in the book. It's sort of like a zine, like a periodical. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of in that spirit where, you know, this sort of stuff manifest originally. You know what I mean? It was in the zine culture, and those, like, you know, the cheap books that you would have at the airport, and that sort of, you know, that sort of thing is where this stuff really gained its foothold, and we're sort of taking it back to its roots and then continuing it into the future, right? So yeah, it's like our book is very much a continuation of what Ra left off, you know, and we go back to ancient Greece and go, hey, they were doing the same thing he was doing, check it out. And we're showing our audience all the cool shit that he was doing, you know what I mean? Like, your book mentioned satire, the word satire, so many times.
Yeah.
And anybody who knows
really
so many times. I tried to pull up the ebook and do a Apple F to type the word satire, and then it crashed, and then had to restart the computer, and then you came on. So I didn't have enough time to see how many times you use the word satire, but our audience, that's very, very, very important. You know what I mean? Like we take a look at what the ancient satire, the tradition of satire, because it dates back tens of thousands of, 10,000 years, dancing around a maypole, dancing around a phallic pole. And if you weren't participating in the fertility ritual, there was a designated person in the community that was allowed to roast you and to shame you and to make you feel bad for not participating, right? Because you're not contributing to the magic, that fertility magic that all this stuff is rooted in. You're not participating in it. So the person that was designated to shame you was called a satirist, and a person that was a victim of that shaming was satirized. right? And it just
Mhm.
snowballed from 12,000 years ago up until now. And
How-
and Raw was like deep, thick in that stuff,
Oh,
How-
satire for sure. Yeah, man.
And one of the questions that I want to like maybe sort of in your philosophical and his philosophical,
I love your
like, would you describe him as more of a philosophical satirist or a satirical philosopher? Like which, or is it, at times he played both masks. How do you think, what I
I'll
see
say this,
both,
man.
I
I
see
see
both
that
of those things in his book, and I go, at what time is he doing philosophical satire? What point is he a philosophical satirist? Like, is that what, did he lean on one more than another? Is it like at points when he was doing his lives, he was leaning on one, and in his writings, he's more of one or the other? Like, what do you think? Like, how do you? Yeah,
I think he did a good job at like providing a contextual education of what satire is.
right.
He during the 1980s, obviously he was already doing satire with Illuminatus trilogy and with the Discordians with Operation Mindfuck in the late 60s. But when he goes to Ireland in the 1980s, where he lived from 1982 to around 1988, he's close to Trinity College. He's living close to there. And Trinity College has all the collected works of Jonathan Swift, the original works. And so Wilson spent a lot of time in the library there reading Jonathan Swift. And then not just Jonathan Swift, he fell in love with like maybe in Ireland, maybe the second most famous Irish writer, arguably maybe Brian O'Nolan, who is Flann O'Brien, the author of the book The Third Policeman and a few other books. And he spent about 25 years writing a column as the Sir Miles Nagopoli in Dublin there. And Bob really got into him in the 80s living out there. And it influenced his book, The Widow's Son, which is the second book in his historical Illuminatus chronicles. It came out, he wrote it in 1985. And that book is like, I think it's one of his best books, really. And it's pure, amazing philosophical satire, or satirical philosophy. Who the fuck knows? Because that book, what he did was in the structure itself. And I wanted to comment, like, I like what you guys did with your book in this tradition of experimental prose, because that's what Wilson was as a novelist. He was an experimentalist first, and he got that from Joyce and Burroughs, but he was always that anyway. They were kindred creative spirits in that regard. But from Brian O'Nolan in the book The Third Policeman, Wilson took this thing where O'Nolan's book was filled with footnotes. Like, it would take up, like, at one point, like, almost the full fucking page. And he had a whole Flann O'Brien. There was a whole other parallel storyline going on, but they were related. So the parallel storyline in the footnotes of The Third Policeman is all about this philosopher named de Selby, who Flann O'Brien has created. But the protagonist of the book is a huge, he wants to write a book about de Selby. And the whole book is about him trying to save money well, he murdered someone. He hit him. The book opens with this guy getting hit in the head with a spade, a shovel spade. And then he takes his money, and he does that to buy this huge collection of de Selby's collected works, so he could then be the foremost scholar of de Selby. And he fills these footnotes of the book with it. It's absolutely hilarious. Great fucking book. So Bob read this, and he implemented that for the prose of Nature's God. Excuse me, Widow's Son, for Widow's Son. And he did something brilliant in his footnotes. Is he draws like two parallel storylines, but he's including all this stuff that he was already writing about, like Propaganda Due, Priory of Sion, and he's tying this into this historical tale from like the 1700s. And this is like the novel that I recommend people to read from Bob, really, because it's so fucking funny. And he was at his satirical peak, I'd say, in the 80s in Ireland. And in the 80s, he discovers the Church of the Subgenius fellas, And so they really inspire a lot of this kind of satire. And I think this notion of like philosophical satire really is a cultural phenomenon. It's become even bigger now, and Wilson was a part of that. He's a huge, sort of like a cornerstone of that. And this is where you get people like George Carlin. George Carlin considered himself a writer, not a stand-up comedian. He would say that repeatedly, but he did stand-up comedy. So like, I think Bob he's a philosopher of satire.
Hell yeah.
You know?
Hell yeah. I fucking love that, philosopher of satire, because like when you have the eye for satire, you have the ability to recognize it in a lot of the philosophy that's already been written. Like I know Ra's a big fan of Nietzsche, and there's a book recent that I don't want to say very recent. I can't remember exactly when it was put out, but it's Nick Moore is the guy's name, and it's called Nietzsche's Last Laugh, and it asks that same question about Nietzsche. Was Nietzsche a philosophical satirist or a satirical philosopher? Because once you have that satirical lens that you put everything through, it makes his work make so much sense, right? He'll build stuff up only to tear it down later, to take you for that ride of building it, because he knows that, oh, this is going to get torn down, but you as the reader don't know that what he just built for you is going to get torn down, to demonstrate that, like, don't buy into other people's BS. You know what I mean? They're systems, like all systems fail. So, that's been one of the cornerstones of philosophical and satirical philosophy is, demonstrating how systems fail by building satirical systems. You know what I mean? Just like, and there's no real clear delineation between those two concepts. So I'm sort of exploring that, as well as how many penises Cerberus has, because, you have to have that philosophical satirical lens to even ask a question like, how big was King Kong's dong and how many penises does Cerberus have, and you have to have that lens. Like Karl Marx was a satirical writer. Volume 1 of Das Kapital, he references Horace 7 times. 7 references to Horace, the satirist, the guy that said bread and circus and all that. That guy, that's not a coincidence, right? You have to have read Horace to actually be able to quote him 7 times in a book that people go, oh, it's like a gothic horror, when they give a alternative explanation of what kind of book it is. And it's like, no, it's a work of satire. Like, this is a satirical book that's like, philosophically satirical. It's in that same realm that, like, I dub Hegel, Karl Marx, and Nietzsche, as well as Max Stirner, who I know Raul was influenced by because he was an anarchist. They were like the what I call the German silly billy school of philosophy. So if like you read Hegel and you don't realize that Hegel wrote Phenomenology of the Spirit while sitting on the toilet, like literally shit posting, right? And like, if you don't know that, it's a different experience than when you do know that and you read it. You know what I mean? So like, if you're in on the jokes and, being in on the joke and understanding that there is a joke behind what it is you're reading, like, gives you a different experience of the joke itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. I mean, I never knew Hegel was pooping while writing Phenomenon. Gives new meaning to, the idea of like theses and antitheses. I heard growing up, though, that Martin Luther, the father, he wrote the 99 Theses while also pooping.
Yes.
So they call it 99 Feces.
Yes.
It's the 99 Feces. Yeah, it's interesting, man. They don't do the philosophy of poop jokes. I mean, I feel like this is the realm then of like, maybe Diogenes, his whole demeanor is kind of humorous, but he doesn't seem to be, he's kind of satirical. It's kind of like Diogenes is what, like kind of like the punk rock guy there. Is he a satirist himself? He's got bars, man. He's got witty retort.
He was the original press punk, man.
Well, he's also, fucking Oscar the Grouch that lives in the trash can, right? Like, he's that kind of thing, like, leave me alone, like, get out of my son, like, it's a trope. I did not make this connection until you said it, but my homie Apathy has an album called The Widow's Son. And I'm like trying to watch or research while we're talking, but Robert Anton Wilson put out a book called The Widow's Son, And then, so I think Apathy's connection is like through masonry and stuff, but like it's such a small world. Like all three of us in this room are rappers. Do you want to talk about Prop Anon as what you did as music, or
Yeah,
like,
of course, man. I've done. I think I did 2 shows with Apathy.
really?
Yeah, one in
Yeah.
Brooklyn and then one in Bridgeport. I think it was in Bridgeport.
Okay. I had a studio with him for 11 years.
Wow,
I
cool,
saw
man.
him every other day for a very long time.
That's dope, man.
He's
I
a
never
close friend.
spoke with him. But
I
mean, his music's dope though, man. Respect, bro.
The studio we had was a
doing it.
studio in New London that Bad Brains recorded at.
Right.
Oh,
Yep.
cool, man.
Yeah.
I hung out with HR, man. I hung out with HR.
Hell yeah.
I was on a tour. I put together. I was an MC for a number of years, and then I did a stoner doom rock project as well. You know.
Okay.
But then along with all that, I started a touring agency, like a tour booking agency, and then booked tours. You know, so I handled like the heavy work, man, of like getting the transportation together and like tour managing and stuff like that, and being a driver, but then opening for like Cannibal Ox and shit like that.
Holy shit.
Or Joel Ortiz. That was like a peak sort of thing. Like when he was really popping.
Yeah.
I did a nationwide tour with him, and like I hopped on as the opener, and then like, but that was, as you guys know, in the realm, man, you earn your stripes, dude. So
yes, you do.
No matter how dope you are, like if people don't know you, they don't know you. So you got to make yourself known, and you do that by doing work like driving for hours on end. You're the driver, and the headliner's in the back chilling.
Yep.
I did a quick little tour with Inspect the Deck, and like I was the driver, and clearly I was the driver. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But the reward was, it's like, well, here was a guy. I had his picture up on my wall when I was a fucking youngin', man. Like Inspect the Deck, one of the illest of Wu-Tang, one of the best MCs. And the payoff was I opened for this guy. They paid me a little bit of money, and like that was he told me the story, like the first time that all of them heard their song on the radio. I got to hear that from them, and this was before that Wu-Tang show came out. Yeah, I got to hear it straight from like the source, and he said that like after, because he's a grumpy old man, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
Like, who the fuck are you? But at the end of that kind of tour, he opened up a little bit, and I was like, yo, Deck, what's and he's like, yeah, this is what happened. And I didn't even ask him. He just kind of said it, which was really nice. Cause to me, that was like, it meant like, yeah, you're cool. You know what I mean?
That's so crazy.
Telling that sort of story. And so those are the things that I look at and I value. It's when I think about like the hip hop path or whatever that I walked upon, and I love hip hop, man. Like, you grew up immersed in it. I grew up immersed in it. So it's always,
so did I.
Opened the world to me, like literally,
I mean, I learned all the craziest shit from hip hop. You know what I mean? I learned so much from hip hop that they never taught us in school. And it was like,
like how to count to 4.
Yeah, how to count to 4.
How to count to 16.
All the other, all the fucking all the conspiracy shit came from hip hop. It was like that's how I got into that.
You were introduced to it. Yeah.
Right. But to me, that's how I was introduced to it. But like, it's crazy. Your songs are fucking incredibly good. I wish you would put out, 100 more.
Yeah. When were you like actively making?
Yeah. I wanted to ask that question too. Like, when was your kind of era?
I swear I've seen you at a show, but I didn't like know like who you were at the time. You know what I mean?
Where were you going to shows? Like mostly in Connecticut? Did you go to Rhode Island at all?
Yeah, Providence, Boston.
I played a few times in Providence and Boston.
Okay.
Yo, yeah, I did. I did a show with Sean Price and R.A. the Rugged Man up there in Providence.
Holy shit, R.A. the Rugged Man.
I did a few shows with him. Yeah, so, and I was like, that was dope because I put that show together. Like I got Sean Price's people and then linked up R.A. and I was like, this is a perfect match, It's
absolutely
great. And Providence was a great show. People were really, really into that. And I felt like I had a good, clean set. You know, when you feel like you have a good, clean set, like you get all the fucking words out.
Yeah.
You know, like people don't know, you know, that
No,
the work
it's-
involved. You
Yeah,
know? Yeah. They just
It's-
think if you suck, they don't want to. They're like, who the fuck is this? You know, but if
Yep.
you're dope, they're like, yeah, that was dope. And they'd be like, thanks. You know?
yeah.
So, but the era was most like, so I did stuff. My path there was I grew up, born and raised in 23 miles outside of Brooklyn, just in Long Island, New York. Engaged with hip hop, like going to shows like drum and bass and hip hop shows, like as a teenager and stuff like that. I ended up moving to Hawaii for a few years.
Holy shit.
Like I like dropped out of college and shit, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna just I drop off the map. And then it was ironically out there, they had at the time a super vibrant hip hop scene, like, you know, what we call the underground hip hop scene, right?
Yeah.
And they were very much influenced by LA, and mostly LA at the time, like Project Blowed, right?
Project Blow is the best shit.
Yeah.
Jesus. I love all that stuff.
Yeah, really, really like intelligently, like musically intelligently, jazz influenced, dynamic, complex rhyme schemes. And every rapper out of that sort of Project Blowed, like so unique. And then I didn't even know about Project Blowed at the time, because when you grow up in New York and maybe the Northeast, it's a fortress mentality. It's just New York, you know? Yep. So it was really nice getting the listening to this more kind of like freed up, like sort of hip hop vibe, you know, like people were really like doing interesting stuff, like Bus Driver. I remember hearing a Bus Driver song for the first time. I was like, holy shit.
Bus Driver's a shit.
Yeah.
Dude, I've seen Bus Driver dozens of times.
I've seen him at least 5 times.
Anytime Bus Driver came around when I was a kid, I was like, I'm going to see Bus Driver. Like, I'm going to that Bus Driver show. Like,
I would drive him to Bus Driver shows.
Every venue, dude. I've seen him in a coffee shop, and I've seen him on stage for thousands of people. Like, you know, that's one of my favorite artists of all time, Bus Driver.
Yeah, and he's so intelligent, and he's such a shit.
Yeah,
he's a comedian, man. But of the best, like, props to, you know, as an MC, like, props to you, bro. Like, he actually was the first person I opened for, was and this was in Hawaii. I linked up with we formed a little group out there. We called ourselves Lowest Common Denominator, and we put out a couple tracks and opened for Bus Driver and Radio Inactive, the Weather EP, Dataless. Now I'm dating myself. And they put that album together. And so that was the first time I fucking really stepped on stage in front of a whole crowd, like a real stage. Because before then, I would like hop on the mic at like various drum and bass events. And like at the time in Hawaii, early on, I was just hijacking the mic and shit. I'd be like, fuck this guy, I'd grab the mic.
Yeah.
That was part of the thing then.
Well, I've been on the other side of that. I've had people literally try to fuck you, give me that goddamn mic. I don't want to hear about fucking robots right now. Give me that fucking mic. You know, because I always rapped about sci-fi and funny shit, you know, like I that was
for
my
me at the
take.
time. It was more like I was just drunk and I really wanted to rhyme.
Yeah,
and that was not the thing to do, and I quickly got exited. You know,
well, I've done that too.
Yeah.
I literally was like, "Hey, how much did you pay to get in here?" And be like, "Yo, I paid your fucking fee." And I was like, "All right, you get your money back. You get a beer. Get the fuck out of here. You're not like, this is not the place for this." You know, like I've done that to people in the crowd. You know what I mean? Like it's like, what year were you in Hawaii? What?
This was around this is a while ago now. This is 2002-ish.
Okay.
That's really when things were, you know, and then slowly working on this. Yeah, building with this crew, Lowest Common Denominator, man.
Right on.
And that was really dope, because the most thing that I really liked the most about that was, like, you know, I went to Hawaii. I didn't know anyone, you know, like, and I didn't go out there to join the fucking military. You know what I mean? Like, I went out there after a series of like what Terrence McKenna calls heroic dose mushroom trips. And I ate a half an ounce of mushrooms one day, and I tripped for I don't know how long.
Yeah.
And I got like a fucking vision, and I was like, go to Hawaii. And I was like, okay. and I did that. so that was like to be able to, you know, you're a young person, like to meet other young people where you're at and feel like you're a part of like a scene. That was really nice, man. Like, and
Yeah.
to engage with Hawaii that way as a mainlander,
Yeah.
because you know that we're mostly tourists and to people growing up there. So like it was
Were
a
you
really
on,
nice education. You know what
Were
I
you
mean?
on Oahu and where?
Wahoo.
Oahu, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hell yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make the connection because one of my best homies, Enemy the Illest, that's kind of where he got started rapping, was in Oahu, because he was in the Air Force, and so he started rapping around that time. I think it was 99, 2001, 2002. Soup One was his homie, and they were rapping at this around the same time there. But then Mandy lived there in 2009,
Yeah, I lived
10,
there for
11.
I lived there for a year before I
Yeah.
went to college.
2009.
Which island?
Oahu.
Oahu, yeah.
Oh
He
shit,
lived
we're
in-
at. We're at.
Waikiki. No,
No, it was Waipahu, which was like kind of the center. It was like as far west as you could get before it gets really sketchy and goes around that. You know,
I had to look it
Yeah,
up.
yeah.
Waipahu, that's the west side, man, the upper west side. So a lot of the native Hawaiians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was out. It was. A
Oh,
local
I went to
we
a
lived in
native-
we lived in a local neighborhood and stuff. It was
My
cool.
sister was dating a native, and they took us to a native bar, and it was the fucking craziest place ever, and it was so dope. And it was
Yeah.
like $2 beers, where everything else on the fucking island is like $8 for
Yeah.
a fucking beer.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was cool.
There was
cool as
one
fuck.
time I was out there. So the dude that our sister was dating was a busker.
He was
That's
a
like how
busker.
he was a
Yep.
busker
on the weekends.
So we would go out on Waikiki and, you know, just play music. And one night he invites me. He's like, "Hey, do you know how to play this like standing drum, like the drum you sit on, and it, you know, you can hit all the different, the snare and the bass and all that. You just kind of have to do it with your hands, right?" I don't know what they're called, but he gave me one of those, and then goes out and starts playing for, you know, all the tourists out there. And their gimmick was to play blues riffs, but like very kind of Hawaiian-esque. Like they were Hawaiian blues, but with a Hawaiian flair, and just kind of go around and just
The Blues Brothers.
yeah, it had that vibe. So it was all, you know, just acoustic stuff that they were playing. So I'm just sitting there playing, maintaining a beat, right? And some dude in a fedora walks up, you know, flip flops, you know, cargo jeans and necklace, whatever, comes up and goes, "Hey, you guys sound great. Can I play with you?" And we're like, "Yeah, man, sure, jump in, whatever." So he opens his case, you know, pulls the guitar out, they start jamming or whatever, and then a crowd just starts building, like maybe 20 people, and then 50 people, 70 people. We're on the corner in Waikiki.
Yeah.
There's probably 100 people watching us. And he goes, "Hey, man, it got too busy. I'm going to put my guitar away." He takes all the cash out, puts it in his case, and then walks away, right? And one of the people that's in the crowd goes, "Yo, hey, do you know who that guy was? Do you know who that guy was?" And the two locals there were like, "Oh, yeah, absolutely." It turned out to be Jack Johnson.
Oh,
I got the jam with, and I was like, the Banana Pancakes guy. Like, I don't know who that. Like, that was the only song I knew by the guy. I didn't know that like he was a big deal, but it was the Banana Pancakes guy. So I got the
Bubble
jam with
toast.
Jack Johnson, and
That's
in
awesome,
the corner
bro.
in Waikiki for like 5 minutes, and then too many people started watching. It was great.
Dude,
It was rad,
really-
dude.
Hell yeah, man. I got a Jack Johnson story too, man.
Let's hear it.
And to clarify that guy's really cool, because I worked in New York a lot as a music PA, live concert music PA. So like different companies and shit, like Live Nation or whatever other local shit. So you're the guy that fucking has to take the towels off the stage at the end of the night, and you got to
Yep.
show up first and leave last and stuff like that. But one of the cool things is sometimes you'll drive the artists around, and you'll always get to see the show for free. And so the last gig that I did, because they worked you really hard, there was no union, and you got paid like $11 an hour. You know what I mean? And the whole thing was like, well, you get to see this show for free, so shut the fuck up, you know? And so being in the music realm too, I mean, this was great. But the coolest fucking artist ever that I ever fucking drove was Jack Johnson and his band. And I was very grateful that they were the last show that I worked. After this guy fucking did like an amazing show at Prospect Park, people cheering, like standing ovation at the end, I'm just standing backstage. The dude fucking comes up to me and he's just like, "What's up, man?" Like, so
Crazy.
similar vibe as to what you're saying, man. And it's really nice. Like, I think that he's a really nice sort of representative of the best parts of Hawaii, like that we all need, man. Like that guy's famous as shit, but he's cool too, you know. So that's dope, man. That's really cool to hear that, man.
so fucking random, dude.
That's so random because I didn't know this connection before we even started this. I was like, oh, holy shit, we got a Hawaii connection going on here. Like that's,
I mean, it's so serendipitous how like we happen to know so many of the same people because like
yeah,
we were talking before the show like you were just a guy who wrote a book about a guy that I love. Turns out you're a guy who knows so many people that I love, right? Like it's so
and the person who wrote the forward to all of our books is Sketch the Cataclysm.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh yeah, I know Sketch. It's like, what the fuck? How the fuck is this? Literally, Mandy was like, hey, I want to interview this guy because he wrote this book about Robert Anton Wilson. And I started researching you and listening to podcasts, and I found out you're a fucking rapper. I look you up on SoundCloud, and I'm like, holy shit, it's fucking good rap. And I'm like, did you know he's a rapper? He's like, oh yeah, I kind of knew. And I'm like, well, what the fuck, man? I would have been more easy. I would have been more like, hey, what's up, dude? I tried to be very formal and like reaching out to you. Like you're our first cold contact. Everyone else is somebody we've known. You know what I mean? Like at least to me, like
yeah. Shit, have we known we could have just had Sketch call you?
Yeah, we just hey, what's up? Let's.
Hey, I was just on this podcast. You got to talk to these guys.
Yeah,
that would have worked out so much better than like praying that you saw it or me trolling you while you're doing a live stream. That's how we really got in touch. I was like,
icons, man. What was this motherfucker saying to me, man?
Yeah, man. I was just watching your live stream, and I was like, hey, man, like just kind of just trolling or whatever, and then next thing I know you're on the show, and like we know people that
it's great, man.
It's
I would love to read the
so
book,
funny,
man.
man.
Please send me the
yeah,
book.
We'll mail you.
I'll mail. Yeah, we have one extra. I'll send you one.
That'd be great.
In the mail for
or
you.
like to answer back to the question of the archives and stuff too, because this was like a major callback now, but like what was so cool was discovering Wilson does not have an archive yet. Wilson does not have special collections at so-and-so library at such and such university. So that, to draw in hip hop, man, that was like, record collecting, like digging in the crates. Like it was a different type of digging in the crates experience. Like, so instead of going to record stores and, looking for records, it was like, oh man, let me go to NYU because they have correspondence between Bob and Tully Kupferberg, who was the co-founder of that group, the Fugs, who they're considered like the proto-punk rock, one of the proto-punk rock bands. It was Tully Kupferberg and Ed Sanders. And Tully Kupferberg was written about in Allen Ginsberg's famous poem, Howl. And Ginsberg makes him a legend because he writes how Kupferberg, under an alias for the poem, threw himself from the Brooklyn Bridge and landed on the water and swam out unscathed, but in reality, Kupferberg wanted to kill himself at that time. And he threw himself from the bridge and broke every fucking bone in his upper body and had to get like peeled out of the water by a passing like Coast Guard ship, and took him forever to recover. But such is the power of art, right? Like Kupferberg is then a legend at that time, right? And Kupferberg is a super interesting writer and performer, and the Fugs are really fun to listen to. And so like, even discovering that like Wilson was like friends with these guys like way back in 1962 and how close to friends, I'm not quite sure, but I mean, they're writing letters to each other in the 80s that's when Bob, that correspondence was. So like, it was this sort of constant experience of sort of what Wilson writes about. He gets from Crowley, like the soldiers and the hunchbacks, right? So the hunchback is a question mark, a soldier is an exclamation point. Like I was driven by questions about Wilson, sort of this is being the inspiration of the book in a way. It's like, as a fan, I just wanted to find out more. It's how I do my research. I want to, and maybe it's indicative of where we're at today, but like, I want to do a full, as much as I can and get an understanding, like, cause my view of Wilson changes over time too. And this was my final lesson with my teacher. He's pretty much my main philosophical teacher. There are things that I don't agree with Wilson. And then there are things that I thought were like, oh God, I'm definitely not with that, and then I put it all in the book, you know what I'm saying? Like, cause then my job as a biographer was not to write some hagiography. I don't want to be the the Wilson disciple and the voice of Wilson today. Like, I'm a writer, man, and that's what I got from Bob. Is like be an artist on your own 2 feet, 10 toes down. You know what I mean? Like when you're in a cipher, you don't want. I mean, at least we were raised in this. You never want to sound like the next guy next to you.
No.
You have to be unique, and you don't want to bite their shit either.
Yeah.
Smacked in the face, right? At least figuratively now, right? Like so, like when it came to this book and writing this book, it's like this is my time to create my shit, but giving props, like toasting this guy Wilson, because we're in an era of constant roasting, and not satirical roasting either, but just like, I fucking hate you. Yeah. Like it's this kind of little, one phrase I've heard, Wetiko, this sort of like entity that's floating around, Wetiko. And Wetiko is the kind of like this being we create, and it's the projection of all our fucking like shadow. And the internet today is revealing more of the collective human shadow than ever before.
So
we're all trying to digest this shit and figure this stuff out. You know what I mean? Not try to project your shit too much, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, this was the final lesson for me for Wilson, and wanting to, pump out these Wilson books and then keep it moving as my own artist, who's influenced by Bob, just as George Carlin was influenced by Bob, just as fucking Bill Drummond, the creator of KLF, was influenced by Bob, Morrison, Alan Moore, all these fucking great creators themselves, Kembra Fowler, like who create their own shit. That's what it's about, right? Each one teach one. Like, and that's the lesson of Bob that he's trying to get across. That's why I never wanted to be a fucking guru and be like, oh, I'm channeling, whatever fucking South Asian name you can think of, and here's a white person doing that, and money in exchange for whatever, right? He's like, nah, dude, I'm out. Like, I don't want to hang out. I gotta go. Don't make me a guru. Like, and so, but still, this is the irony, because he's a cult writer and he's in touch with some sort of magic, like, because people who discover his work, like, who really, when it really sticks, there's something magical and what, was called synchronistic about it. Like, Mandy, your story, so great to hear how you come across Wilson, how it's this organic, like, discovery, like, and this is how Wilson's work really gets passed along, like, for so many years, through word of mouth, because he existed in this sort of parallel, alternative, like, lane of what the counterculture built. But now we're at this interesting time where it's been already almost at least over 10 years where this idea of the counterculture has collapsed and the internet and blah, blah, fuckity blah.
Right.
And like, so, these are all questions I had while writing this book and thinking about, like, is Wilson's voice still important? Does it need to get out there? And like, I think indubitably motherfucking yes, because he's already been a major influence on so many aspects of our counterculture. You see 23 popping up in all these fucking things. You know what I mean? Even like recently on Saturday Night Live, the fucking Saturday Night Live sketch where they're doing the Weekend Update, and Josh, whoever, is talking about how Christy Nome, the DHS lady with her $50 bling watch, standing in front of a fucking like room full of shirtless fucking dudes, and like, someone saying like, this is going to be looking like her OnlyFans fucking video that's coming. But they put a little child in there because whatever, it's a joke, some part of the joke that I missed, but the child had what number on? 23. So here you go. Like, Wilson is already an influence. So people just need to know who he was. And I think that's very important, especially for now. And like, he's not perfect at all. You know what I mean? Like, and I think I put that all in the book. I'm not trying to tell people to become Team Wilson here. You know what I mean? Like, but I think that what I really tried to show is, if you want to live a life as an artist in America, like, get ready, because you're going to encounter the Chapel Perilous. And this is how this person moved through it. And I want to provide that.
I think you're absolutely right about that. I mean, there's so many connections to him. I had no idea until he threw me into this shit.
I mean, we were just on. My brother was just interviewing one of the people that contributed to the book, and they mentioned Alan Moore, and my brother's like, I the name sounds familiar. And I'm like, how do you not know that? Like, you
I
know,
don't know.
it's like,
I don't
and
know.
it's like, had he been immersed, like had this interview happened before that, then it would have like that connection would have been made, and goes, oh, that's where all this stuff that is coming from. But like, and it's like the person that he was interviewing was familiar with that and familiar with Raw. So like dropping Alan that name, it seemed like would have been a thing that connected. But part of the joke of the show is my brother genuinely doesn't know about any of this stuff. So the podcast is to teach him about all of this stuff, so that the book just gets better and better and better, and like can digest the jokes and see the jokes from a different angle. You know what I mean? So the book like organically becomes it's a feedback loop of these interviews. We're on book number 2. It's all of the books are collected as all 5 books that we put out each year are collected into one hardcover. So we put them out as volumes, and we just put out volume 1. We're working on volume 2 right now. So, all of this interview stuff that we're having is like influencing volume 2 of the book, which is like a feedback loop, because we've already explained that it's already existing in the future, and all of that, non-Euclidean, hyperstitial stuff that's happening that, we're playing with literally dangerous magic, but making it fun.
But at the same time, it's like some of the stuff that Raw talks about, like mind tunnels and all this shit. I hear this stuff from like Duncan Trussell. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know this was influenced by somebody else. I thought this was an original idea from Duncan Trussell, where I was like, oh, what is this dude talking about? Mind tunnel. Here we go. I'll go on a mind tunnel. Let's do it.
All right. So speaking of mind tunnels, before this interview, we reached out to our Discord community and said, hey, we're interviewing you, and send us some questions and all of that. And one of the questions, it absolutely is hilarious. It says, explain to me like I'm a child, what are reality tunnels? ... asking
Yes.
for a friend.
I should ask that question.
So what would be your way of explaining reality tunnels and broader, not necessarily like how did Raw end up stumbling upon this idea? Like, what's the genealogy of that idea? It's similar to the Chapel Perilous question, like how did it first get used, and then how did Raw use it, and then what's your interpretation of it after all of these years? And what do you think? Because they're asking for a friend, and they need you to explain it to them like they're a child.
Who's asking for a friend?
One of the people in Discord.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Something to do with a dog or a frog. I can't remember.
One of those people.
Yeah.
Right on, man. I guess very simply, like very, very simply, reality tunnel is equivalent to, if you're, people in little babies in cribs. So you got one crib at one side of the room, one crib at the other side of the room. They're seeing different things, different angles of the room.
Yeah.
Extrapolate that to reality as a whole. Like, we're all collecting information at different parts of this quote unquote room, and the room is the planet, right? And in order for any healthy system to properly function, there needs to be as clear and clean feedback loops as possible. So that means that people have to learn how to communicate with each other as clear and clean as possible when communicating their view of the room, their view of where they're at. If we're speaking philosophically, I would call it, it's a phenomenology, right? Phenomenology being that sort of thing where you can only speak on truly, your 5 senses, right? Anything beyond the 5 senses, you're abstracting, right? Bob gets this too from this thing called general semantics. It's in the book, right? His breakdown, general semantics. So meaning, we only know what we can existentially experience, like scientifically,
right?
As soon as we start creating explanations of what's happening in the room next door based on limited amounts of experience of the stimuli, you're only hearing your neighbor's bachata music really fucking loud. You don't know how many people are in there. Are they doing tattoos or are they doing something else? Are they having a party? Who knows? But it's very easy to start projecting and be like, those fucking bastards, man, always with the fucking music. What are they doing in there? Right. And so just the point being, like, sitting in this notion that you don't know everything that's going on around you. You only know truly like this limited amount of what's happening. So you can communicate this to other people. And from there, you can build this type of consensus of, what if there's a leak in the room? Well, we got to figure out how to fix the leak.
Right.
What if there's all this stuff caused by global warming? Well, we have to figure out, the whole scientific system of how to prevent things that occur from global warming and shit like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Absolutely.
So, yeah, man, it's like, and so where does it come from? It's not the term reality tunnel. I think it could have been like, I don't know exactly where exactly comes from. It's not Leary who comes up with it. I don't believe it's not John Lilly. I think it was like a German, like
Korzybski.
Well, Korzybski, he creates the term. The map is not the territory, but the term.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you like that one too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not quite sure if that is Korzybski.
Maybe I'm crossing my. I might be crossing my strings here a little bit.
I mean, I'm not going to claim total fucking authority on that either, man. Because, like, but the point being, it is what it is. A reality tunnel, man. Like, we all have tunnel vision, and so Bob unpacks this throughout, like, so much of his work in different ways. Like, so one other way to explain it is that our brains, when we're born, are way more plastic and malleable, and we're able to, for instance, learn languages much quicker between the ages of 0 and 6 than at any other time after. So people who are bilingual, they grew up in bilingual households, right? Someone can speak Korean and English. Their grandmother was Korean. This is in America, so now they know Korean way easier, etc. Right? Like, what happens as we get older, like the stimuli, our brain just kind of like narrows the amount of light. The aperture closes more and more. That's a survival mechanism. We can't walk around. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Pi, Darren Aronofsky's first movie. Well, it follows a guy who sees too much. Right? Okay. His shit is too open. He sees God, and it drives him crazy, and he puts a drill bit in his head to give himself a self-lobotomy.
Lobotomy, yeah.
You know what I mean? But, like, can you handle the aperture fucking rising and more light coming in? And this is the whole notion of, like, where psychedelic therapy comes in, or different types of therapy. It's all about opening yourself to parts of yourself, different parts of yourself. Like, and some things are closed off because of trauma, right? And oftentimes that is what happens. And so Wilson and Leary, they utilize this term imprinting, right? Things get imprinted, like a neural net is formed, almost like a picture is taken. And this neural net is a pathway of synapses in your brain that physically activate when you're experiencing the world. And so we now have a set sort of, set of blinders, or a set imprint that the light is being filtered through, and we're automatically, just because it's filtering out certain stimuli. So when you do, like, say, like some heavy psychedelics, or say you're sitting in an ayahuasca ceremony, and all of a sudden as it starts trickling through your body, you feel really itchy all over, and like things are opening up, and it feels weird. You feel like your lower back in a way that you never felt it before, because you're physically feeling more. We're able to according to the theory, shut off aspects of feeling parts of our body in order to function in this world. You know what I mean? Like, but that becomes like a further blinder. So, like, and Wilson's work focuses on this notion of re-imprinting, utilizing psychedelics to re-imprint. So that's how you change your reality tunnel and say, open the aperture to let more light in. You know what I mean?
Yeah. One of the things that we focus on our book, because it's we're satirizing cynicism, which is like that you already mentioned Diogenes. He's the founder of cynicism. It's the philosophy of dog-like, right? So we explore Cerberesian cynicism, which is the cynicism of Cerberus, the three-headed hellhound. And one of the things that we focus on, Raw has this term neuro-linguistic reality tunnels, about how language shapes your reality and all of that. And we focus on olfactory reality tunnels because aroma, you're only capable of approximating. So when you go and try to describe anything that you're smelling, you're immediately in the realm of poetry. So you're communing with Calliope, if you try or not, when you're describing anything that you're smelling. Your experience of smell, the phenomenology of smell, is purely an exercise in poetry, right? So, and the better you are at poetry, the better you are at being able to describe what it is that you're smelling. And if you've never experienced the smell of something, like if that particular aroma isn't available in your, let's say your geography where you are, right? You're never going to experience that smell. You're only going to experience something approximate to that smell. So you're going to go combining different smells that you've previously experienced to describe something that already exists, right? So like dogwood flowers. If you've never experienced dogwood flowers in bloom in Georgia, you're never going to know what dogwood flowers are. You're never going to be able to describe them, but you're going to be able to describe things that are kind of like dogwood flowers when you put them together. So, it's that we're taking the concept in our book of neuro-linguistic reality tunnels and abstracting it a little bit and going back into the phenomenology of it, of the experience of aroma. So, that's kind of how we're taking that legacy and moving it into the future, because robots and AI can't smell. Smell-o-vision doesn't exist. So, if you ask an AI or a robot to describe to you an aroma, they're going to give you an inauthentic description. They're going to try to placate you. They're going to try to just give you word salad that it doesn't describe the actual lived experience, human experience of aroma. You know what I mean? So that's sort of how we're taking on that legacy and adding to it while stepping back from it,
Right. Yeah, I know. I mean, to call back to that notion, you brought up Korzybski, and that's he is prototypical describing a reality tunnel, like you said, neurolinguistic. Like I don't quite know if he uses the word tunnel, but the neurolinguistic tunnels are a major part of this. Yeah, like so. He's a linguistic determinist, right?
Yeah.
And Wilson's a bit of a linguistic determinist too, then in their belief then that the tyranny of words, the structure of the language you use, like creating the reality, how we experience it, how we experience reality and stuff like that. Yeah. So definitely, Korzybski is a great place to look.
Yeah.
For
and
that. No, it's interesting you mentioned the olfactory notion too. Like there's a book, I encountered this a while ago. It's actually, you ever heard of this book? It's called The Smell of Slavery.
The Smell of Slavery? No.
Yeah. It's actually a book.
I'll add that to my list, because that's that's right on what I'm looking for.
It's pretty crazy. It's a book that explores the notion of how slaveholders basically perceived the smell of enslaved people.
Okay.
So it's the exploration of olfactory of racism, because there's like, writings of like slaveholders at that time, like talking about how they smelled like the slaves. They smelled horrible. They smelled disgusting. Like they even had like a specific smell. So the point being, like, of the writer is that how even your sense of smell, like, can be culturally programmed. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my God, that's an amazing connection that I love, that just organically happened there. Like, you got to send me a link to that. I would love to read that. I'm adding that to my list of, because like that's what I study. Like I study smell and how people have described smell over time, and that's what I like, literally what I wanted to do when I was going to go to grad school. And then I ended up getting a job that paid more than whatever that degree would have afforded me, being a professor and that stuff. So, I kind of abandoned that, but never fell out of love with the olfactory, and that concept that you can't put it into language. It's purely poetic, and you can never
talks about this.
Well, what we were doing was connecting the olfactory
Okay.
reality tunnels that we do in our book with how Ra describes neurolinguistic reality tunnels and all that. And one of the things I wanted to show you how all of this is already in the book.
Yeah.
There's a quote in here. So one of the things that part of our writing process is I would literally we would turn the microphone on and I would just talk for a matter of time, and then my brother would clip things that sounded interesting. And one of the things that he organically clipped that I talked about, I said this quote. It said, "The meal is not the menu, the map is not the territory, the fart is not the turd."
I know. I thought it was funny.
No, this is true though. There's truth to this.
It is. It's true. The fart is not the turd. The
map is not the territory. You talked about that like 10 minutes ago. Like I forget who you said it was.
Yeah, we just went on a diatribe while you were draining your lizard.
I had to pee.
I know.
I have children, so
Why does that have to do with anything?
I had to cook, clean, and do stuff before we could interview, and I.
So you've been holding this piss the whole time?
I didn't have to pee.
I've also been holding the piss the whole time.
Let's take a break, man.
Yeah,
I'm gonna do that too right now.
Yeah, all right. So we're gonna take a break, piss, and then we're gonna come back.
Did that sort of breakdown of like reality tunnel make sense? Because I kind of say it differently every time. You know what I mean?
I mean, the first time I ever heard of it is like I said, Duncan Trussell. So like to me, it's just this fucking funny way of explaining how everyone's connected.
I think too, like these ideas have been sort of in the discussion. Like we grew up already. We didn't know that it was Bob talking about stuff.
So much that he turns me on to this stuff. I think you're right. It's like this weird, like, oh, this has been going on the whole time, and nobody really told us who these people were. Because my connections to Bob is like Penn Jillette or somebody like that, like I through the subgenius of something, like that's how I kind of even barely know what this is. And then he throws me into it, and it's just like this fucking you call it a reality tunnel. It's a chaos tunnel to me because I don't have a lot of time to just dedicate to just sitting and like reading and lecturing and all of the like I get snippets, you know what I mean? Like I'm looking for like highlight and story cues, and give me fucking 5 to 10 minutes between picking my kids up or doing something to just like digest what's going on, because I just don't have 4 hours to listen to somebody speak for, you know what I mean? Like
well, like I like this sort of like kind of understanding of the concept too, right? And Bob gets this from Korzybski, and it's the notion of multi-ordinal, and he writes about this in Prometheus Rising. So the 8th circuit model of intelligence, there's 8 circuits, whatever. The first one deals with what he calls survival stuff. Second circuit, emotional territorial, right? Top dog, bottom dog, who's running the block. Third circuit, semantic, right? Fourth circuit, moral, parental. But what he's saying is that like we have these different, obviously, parts of ourselves. Like throughout the day, we cycle through these different like parts of ourselves, later called states specific information systems. Like these are literally like you are multiple selves throughout the course of a day. And the illusion is you forget that when you're in each self, you forget about all your other selves, right? And so and you could be communicating from a mostly emotionally territorial place, trying to talk to someone who is in like a parental place, right? So they're not as like, hey, get the fuck off my thing. And they're like, hey, calm down. What's wrong with you? Or you could be communicating to someone who's also then in that emotional territorial space, and people get into fistfights around that shit. You know what I mean? Right. And so all of this is part of the reality tunnel thing too. It's like, first and foremost, understanding that like what you see of the world is not what's going on in the world. Pretty fucking simple. However, so much bullshit happens when people are saying it's the Gulf of America. No, it's the Gulf of Mexico. It's the fucking this. It's the that. And then what happens? They get into fucking fights over these arbitrary names to a nature that doesn't give a fuck what the hell we call it, really.
Nature.
You know what I mean? But so these are sort of the things that I hope gets like communicated in what Wilson is seeking to communicate. It's rooted in this place then of like what he calls cosmic schmuck. Like if you can admit that you're being a cosmic schmuck, it means that you're, mistaking the map for the territory, because your own perspective, your own reality tunnel is a map, and no map is able to completely map a territory. It's just impossible. So if you try to map that the room that you're in and draw absolutely everything, like for every second of the day, it's not going to, the simulation is not going to match the reality. You know what I mean? The 5%ers call it putting the wisdom before the knowledge.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean? Doing the knowledge is you have to look, listen, observe, and also respect. You know what I mean? Like the earth is not the center of the universe. Like humanity had to discover that through science, and it's just one planet in a galaxy. So, just constantly discovering that we're just one like perceptor in this grand weaving web. That's your reality tunnel. You know what I mean?
Was he into like the middle way? Because he really seems to like have this way about navigating without the extremes. Like he seems to really want to keep to like don't be so judgmental of everything. Does that make sense? This is my interpretation of him. Elementary, kindergarten, grade 1 through 3, like understanding of Bob. Like it seems like he's into some sort of Buddhist. I don't want to say it's Buddhist, but maybe it seems to be the middle way of like, hey, you this is the way you deal with things. Don't be so emotional. Don't be so reactive. I know this is unscripted. Well, this is all unscripted, but like,
this is all
we gave you some fucking questions, but like, I had a feeling we'd go this way, but
yeah, man, no, I think that's a good way to put it. He studied Buddhism a lot throughout the course of his life, like around 1957, probably when he was 25. Alan Watts, I think in 57, put out the book The Way of Zen. So Bob probably read that and was very influenced by that. And then early on, he started going to, him and his wife Arlen were married by a Buddhist priest in 1959. So he was, and throughout the course of his life, he was definitely influenced by Buddhism, but he wanted to integrate all this stuff into science, right? Into a scientific sort of approach. So he likes the middle way is kind of represented like as like Jung's mandala, and of course like he gets into that in Prometheus Rising, right? The center of the circle there, right? So this is perhaps where you want to function from, right? What John C. Lilly called the center of the cyclone, right? And Bob, this is one reason why he loved the work of Timothy Leary so much, because before Leary got into psychedelics, him and his team wrote a book published in 1959 that explored interpersonal psychology. And in that, he created the Leary circumplex. And the Leary circumplex is basically like 64 sort of behaviors or actions or dispositions, attitude dispositions, like that the human animal is capable of having throughout the course of a day. Someone could be managerial, someone could be like docile, someone could be masochistic, someone could be rebellious, et cetera, et cetera. Leary's work, like he was an early pioneered interpersonal psychology. He doesn't really get the props for this. And he observed that people respond like this in social settings, but people get stuck in reacting to the world from only one sort of attitudinal disposition. And then they sort of limit their experience of the world from these different attitudinal places. You know what I mean? You could get stuck as always being a masochist. So no matter what you do, you're going to make people want to fuck you up. You're gonna sabotage them to be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You know, because like deep down, you're a masochist and you don't even know, right? This is what psychology is all about. This is what therapy is all about, to try to help you find out these certain things of yourself so you can free yourself or further free yourself up. For Wilson and Leary, it's then the ability to move along that kind of Leary circumplex and engage with the world from all these different like states of possible human behavior. And again, it's opening you up. It's opening your reality tunnel up. It's opening your aperture up to let in. And the light is in your mind. The light is your neurons opening up in your head. You know what I mean? Like and then you're making yourself more intelligent. Intelligence increase, according to Leary and Wilson.
And you know, there's a fascinating way that internet culture, with like the way that we understand politics now, and Leary and the 64 question thing and Raw all interact. Did you know that Raw was a direct influence on the 4-quadrant political compass that we have now that you see?
You know that.
Okay, so
I believe this actually.
yeah. So
I took that thing and
okay,
it makes sense.
Okay, so little did you know that you took a quiz that Raw directly influenced. So he gave a lecture. It's still available on YouTube. You can see it, to the Libertarian Party back in like the 1980s, when he was like, you know, sort of part of that, because, you know, that's where those people ended up. So he was giving a lecture where he was explaining how when Leary was arrested, the state of California prison system gave him his own quiz, where that's how they dictated, you know, how severe the prison you were in was, you know, I'm sorry if I'm.
Yeah, no, exactly right.
Okay.
No, when Leary was arrested, they gave him the Leary circumplex.
Exactly. Yeah. So they gave him his own quiz. Now, Raw gave that lecture, or gave a lecture to the Libertarian Party where he was explaining this. In that room was the person who designed the 4-quadrant quiz, which is designed to shift you over to the libertarian left, which is where Raw and his influence were. So anybody who takes that quiz, if you're an extremist, it's going to show you that you're an extremist. If you're not an extremist, you're probably going to come out as something like a libertarian leftist, because that's the rational like choice when you take all of it into consideration. And that quiz was literally influenced by the person, or designed by the, you know, person that was in the room at the Libertarian conference that Raw was giving that lecture, and that lecture is available on YouTube.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I got to look that up, man.
Yeah.
Know that.
It's available on YouTube. Yeah,
I took that quiz while at the Maybe Logic Academy, like during the Bob taught a class called Non-Euclidean Politics, which explored his breakdown of kind of like his political and economic influences, and his ideal view of the world, you know. And that's really funny that you mentioned that, though, because like that's where I was like, yeah, I'm a left libertarian.
I'm a left libertarian. There you go.
So am I. Look at that.
Look at that. Like, you're a rational human being. That's not a big. You're a left libertarian.
But it is interesting, though, like this current discussion maybe about libertarianism, where I think maybe my book will revamp this notion of left libertarianism, because this was never an unusual question for me, because maybe I encountered it through Wilson and other writers at the time. Leary once described himself as a left libertarian. Carl Oglesby was a left libertarian. And the 90s, I think that term was used into the 2000s, like late into the 2000s. And but in the last decade or so, it's really kind of gone out of use. Like libertarianism seems to have been mostly now increasingly associated with a right-wing disposition, especially now in this era where you have someone like Peter Thiel, who called himself a libertarian, or J.D. Vance, and like what's being advanced in the current situation is so far, it's not libertarianism, it's fascism.
It got hijacked at some point, and you know, that's why I don't even call myself anything politically. You know, because if in 2009, if you asked me, I would have said I was a libertarian. But at some point, that was hijacked and this no longer means what it used to mean.
Yeah.
Was Adam Kokash a part of the hijacking? What happened to that guy?
Whatever happened to that fucking guy?
Remember
Right?
him?
Yeah, I remember that guy. And he was like big on that the cryptocurrency stuff, where he was like an early adopter of that. And there's a video. There's a video of Raw from, I think it was 1998, where he's talking about cryptocurrency. And he's like, oh yeah, you know, they're doing this cryptocurrency stuff. So like he was on like, you know, like ahead of the game of that stuff, way before the right wingers caught onto it, you know. And it's because it's fundamentally coming from this anarchist, anti-capitalist, you know, left libertarian socialist stuff, where you recognize, you know, the USSR was state capitalism. So like you can add that word to it, and like that's the lens that you look at everything. You go, oh yeah, the USSR was state capitalism, so socialism hasn't existed, and anarchism and communism, all those things certainly haven't existed yet. So you know, and that influences your reality tunnel, where once you introduce the term state capitalism and the concept that the USSR was state capitalism, and you only have to read Lenin. If you read Lenin, Lenin says the USSR is state capitalism. So like it doesn't take a lot to like actually understand through that route to shape your reality tunnel, to understand that. To you know, to shape it and to go, okay, well, the rest of politics, if the USSR was state capitalism, that means the Cold War was capitalism versus capitalism. Right? Like look at the spectacle. You have two different forms of capitalism fighting each other. Is it state capitalism or is it state capitalism? Because they're the same fucking thing. It's the same fucking. It's two, like you were saying. It's different. You know, you know, different cults and different, you know, people on the underground tugging the strings, and it's the influence of the way that they use the words and the way that they shape, you know, people's minds with the way that they use words, right? Like it doesn't take a genius to understand that Ayn Rand was a Soviet spy. So like the way that she twisted the words capitalism to only mean free market capitalism, you know, with her influence and, you know, relationship with Ludwig von Mises, you know, it doesn't take a genius to go, oh, these two fascists were, you know, there was a Soviet spy and a fascist that got into the same room to figure out how to screw with the American people. You know,
it's never heard that before about
I honestly think this is one of his original contributions to the world. Is
no.
Ayn Rand was a
Murray Rothbard implies in his.
Does he really?
Yeah, he's got a piece of satire that's still available online. Murray Rothbard, where he implies that Ayn Rand was actually a Soviet spy, which is very So that's very fun. Like deep, like balls deep into this libertarian satire stuff. Is that Murray Rothbard himself was actually a satirist. So, so like if you understand Murray Rothbard's work as satire, doing the Karl Marx thing, where he's making references to satirists, where he
actually had plays. He had legit plays like on a stage where he was like, they had characters and they were doing a thing. I didn't understand the story, but it's essentially
essentially what you're supposed to get out of that story is Ayn Rand was actually a Soviet spy who was trained in these. She wasn't hot enough to be a honey trap. So what she did was basically create a cult using language, right? Instead of sex magic, she was using language magic.
I wouldn't totally hate on Ayn Rand. She had a little style about her. She was like a little dommy mommy.
Yeah.
She haircut, you know what I mean? Those short dresses.
Yeah.
She tried. That's for sure.
She tried her goddamn hardest. She's the goat, and she looks like one too.
I didn't really write about it much in the book because it was hard to confirm by outside sources, because this kind of shows like I really tried to like thoroughly check out a lot of stuff that Wilson wrote about. And he wrote that he met Ayn Rand and that he was at one time, for a brief period of time, he was very much into the sort of individualist perspective, as was like a whole generation of young thinkers.
Right.
And but then he met her and I don't know if it was some point in the early 60s or mid 60s. And he saw that, you know, she just was like amphetamized, totally like really high on amphetamines. And that was enough for him. Maybe she was saying some other stuff, but he was like, the public face didn't match the private face for him enough to be like,
he says this
into that. Yeah, he wrote about that in a article called Left and Right.
Mhm.
It's in this book, published in the book Email to the Universe.
Jesus Christ.
Right. And,
Okay.
I couldn't again cross-reference it when exactly he met her and stuff. So I don't know if I really mentioned it in the book. It was not what I concentrated on in terms of like Bob and libertarianism, because I wanted to emphasize the left libertarianism aspect of Wilson, where he ends up mostly, but really his collaboration with this writer named Samuel Edward Konkin III.
Okay.
I think
I've heard that.
deserves some shine, man, because he was he had a fucking graffiti tag, man. Seek 3, like
SEK3.
Yeah. And he didn't write graffiti, but like that was a cool like monograph that he had, right? And but he's known for this whole notion called counter economics, which is basically, kind of like gray market shit. You don't pay taxes basically, and like commit small crimes and don't pay taxes, right? Like sell weed, maybe whatever else. Don't be too bad, but make your money, right? And this was a way to dismantle the state, if you will. But he's also known for the term agorism, and the aspect of utilizing the term agorism, which the most famous kind of agorist now is what's his name? Altreich, the fellow who just got pardoned by Trump he started the Silk Road website.
Oh yeah, that guy. Yep.
And so this guy kind of got known. I think agorism kind of got like became a thing around 2010 or something. And so Ross Ulrich, he's an agorist, but agorism is like some sort of voluntary libertarianism. I don't quite remember at the moment off the top of my head. It's in my book, but I want to say like Samuel Edward Konkin III gets credited as being the guy to create the term, but he's credited in the late 70s. But I have a letter that Wilson wrote to this guy, Israel Regardie, where Wilson describes himself as an agorist, like in 1971, or no, the early 70s. So this is all to show that like Wilson really was like on the pulse of so many fucking things.
Crazy.
And
like
can I show you how this ties in with the ancient Greeks? Do you know what the agora was?
No.
The agora was the marketplace in Athens.
Okay.
So where you went to get whatever it was, that's where the markets where you had people set up and stuff. So it was
hold up, go on.
So anyway, it's about removing yourself from one step from the idea of free market capitalism and going back a little bit. So changing the word, but it means something different because you're removing it. So instead of being free market capitalism, because that was corrupted by right wingers, it was agorism, where you're going and maintaining these traditions of a self-regulated market where like if you're if you're a medicine person, there were ways of being tested on the potency of the drugs and such that you're trading in the agora, right? The agora was the place that you went to go get your drugs, your medicine, so this is like all of this stuff comes back to like how like drugs and all of that stuff. If you're a person that's interested in drugs, and you're a anarchist in the 1960s, you're going to run into a person named Carl Ruck, who wrote The Road to Eleusis, who coined the term entheogen. Right. So this is like, it's one of those words that's just so common now, but it still comes back. It comes back from Carl Ruck, right? He coined that term. And the agora was where you went and you got your drugs, your entheogens, right? And Eleusis was, the initiation ritual and all of that stuff, right? And one of the questions that we had from our audience was, did Robert Anton Wilson cross paths with Carl Ruck? Are you able to find any connection between those two names? Because it seems so obvious, but like, how is it possible that those two people didn't cross paths so do you know of any communication that they had between each other? Were they presenting at the same conference at one point? Were they published in the same journal? Like were they even on the same blog at some point? Like any cross between Carl Ruck and Robert Anton Wilson?
I don't know.
Damn.
Yeah, I don't know.
Damn.
They got to be. They're similar age, right? Like they're very close in age,
Ruck
right?
is still alive.
Well, Ruck is still alive, but he's in his 80s, right?
Yeah, he's in his 80s. Yeah.
Ra would be 89, right?
How old would he be now?
He was born in 1932.
32, 89. So I'm pretty close.
So they're probably around the same age, and they're in the same circles, and they're crossing paths with right. Karl Ruck is a guy that got basically canceled by academia for proposing that the kykeon, this ancient Greek ritual potion, contained LSD that they got through ergot. Right. So, he had all of these interesting things, and he wasn't able to actually prove that it was there because the chemistry and the archaeology wasn't there, but he demonstrated it as closely as you could with the time that, with the language that was available at that time. He's only since added to this, and more have been, archaeology has then since demonstrated that he was entirely correct with everything that he said back in the day. But he wrote a book with Hoffman and
Wasson,
about the road to Eleusis and how it contained, it was an LSD ritual. And I worked on a farm when I went to school that was studying heirloom wheat. So part of my job was to bag and tag the ergot anytime that I saw it in the field. And I was working with one of these scientists at one point that came to collect it, and we were talking about ancient Greece and blah blah blah. I love Nietzsche, yada 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 yada. And he was like, "You need to recall Ruck, And then I went to it, and then it was all downhill from there. Like it opened up, it expanded my reality tunnel so much, and that's where I found like all the Cerberus stuff. Karl Ruck actually gives the answer to the Cerberus question: how many penises does Cerberus have? But you have to like get deep, as deep as you are into Ra. You have to get that deep into Karl Ruck to get the Cerberus answer, because it's and it all has to do with Hecate and stuff. But anyway, it would blow my mind that those people didn't cross paths. Right, at all.
Well, I'll say this: like I've come across the title of the book. I've never read the book before this interview. I never knew who Karl Ruck was, so I wasn't looking in terms of correspondence. But after you sent me the questions, I just did a quick Google search, and I saw they don't have any apparent link at this time. Like it's not saying that in the future there might not be more stuff that comes out. I hope that there's more letters and correspondence that comes out.
Well, I mean,
other people.
Karl Ruck's still alive, and I have a friend that is literally doing an interview with him right now. So I'll see
him up, send him a text.
Yeah, no, I'll after this, I'm like, hey man, I interviewed the biography of Ra. He doesn't know.
You got the source right there, though, man. You don't gotta go to me.
I know. I was just
Ruck.
Well, that's the same thing. Is like I'm interested too.
I'm such a fan of Karl Ruck that I would turn into a little fangirl and like start flapping my hands and stuff if I got the opportunity to talk to him. My voice would crack. It would be embarrassing. Yeah. So I'm doing some of the questioning. I'm facilitating it through another person. I would love my brother to interview him.
I would.
He doesn't know the person at all.
I would love to talk.
Hey,
to
my brother's a fan of yours.
Make Scoob do it.
Yeah, we'll make him do it.
I'll do it. I don't give a fuck. That guy seems cool as shit.
Karl Ruck's the man. I love that guy.
You guys are a team, man.
He's got the answer to the Cerberus question.
Yeah.
So most of the questions actually from our audience were about various people that Ra may or may not have interacted. And one of the people that we sort of lampoon and satirize in our book is Nick Land, who's is in that unfortunate right-wing absolute piece of shit space, but was pretty cool back in the 90s and the 80s. What I was able to track down was Semiotex. Nick Land was a contributor to that, and I know Ra was involved with that with the San Francisco one. So I don't know if they crossed paths when they were in Europe at all or anything like that, but they have a lot of the same similar influences. So I don't, So do you know of any correspondence between them or any way that they may have crossed paths?
Well, I think the only mostly way that Land would have like crossed paths with Wilson, because he's born 30 years after him or whatever or more, is that probably maybe at a lecture that Bob gave. And oftentimes Bob, not all the time, but he was open to fans coming up afterwards. That's how I met him, and I lined up an interview with him, and that's how other people did too. I put it in my book, Chapel Perilous, Life and Thought Crimes, Robert Anton Wilson. Greg Bishop, who is also a very super interesting writer and a UFOologist. He met Wilson in the same way, just approached him after an interview. David J. Brown, same way. Richard Metzger, same way. And if Nick Land, out in, perhaps maybe Bob was lecturing in England somewhere, maybe Nick Land attended a thing. Semiotics, I know Peter Lamborn Wilson had a role to play in that. I think that was Semiotics was based out of New York, and Bob. I think he was in a few anthologies of that. I have a couple of them. He contributed a really funny kind of short story to Semiotics magazine book. But that was Peter Lamborn Wilson though, and he was mostly in New York at the time, and Bob was out west, usually mostly during the 90s with that. Bob blurred Peter Lamborn Wilson's Hakeem Bey temporary autonomous zone thing. He said it's like William Blake on acid or some shit like that. Walt Whitman on acid. And, I think a lot of people glossed over in that book, Peter Lamborn Wilson's pedophilic essays about like fantasizing about a 6-year-old boy or some disgusting gross shit like that. And I interviewed Peter Lamborn Wilson a couple of times, and I asked him about some of this stuff, and he didn't want to talk about it. Oh. But for many years, Peter Lamborn Wilson was, he's still very much celebrated for his scholarship in sort of, Islamic studies, heterodox Islamic studies, and he's got a lot of interesting stuff to say with all that. But then he drops in these weird, creepy Nambla essays. Yeah. Right. And so I think there's the role of people like us is to take the good parts of what Lamborn Wilson's talking about to separate it from whatever the fuck that shit is.
I don't ever want to talk about that shit, but does he ever talk about why he wrote that stuff? Like
Lamborn Wilson? Okay, so this is clearly we're talking about another person and not Robert Anton.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Because they have the same last name, sometimes idiots and trolls like mix them up.
Yeah.
Right? But Peter Lamborn Wilson.
The internet sucks, so
yeah. What it was how it got, I guess, passed off or whatever. Like it's in the book Temporary Autonomous Zone. That book was seen as a classic in the counterculture for many years, right? Because of the cool shit he's talking about. But the way that he kind of passes it off is that these essays are all about ontological it's all to shock you and provoke you out of like thinking in a certain way. So that's how he passed it off. But there was a series of articles that were released online, I don't know, over 10 years ago before Lamborn Wilson died and before I interviewed Wilson. I never published these interviews yet. I did 2 interviews with Peter Lamborn Wilson. And, I stopped it in between the fucking thing. And I was like, hey man, I'd like to talk about this with you, if you don't mind. Like, why are they saying this about you? I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. So I was like, okay. And like kind of continued on, but I didn't reach out to him after that. I mean, Peter Lamborn Wilson is another kind of gold mine of counterculture knowledge and history. But like after that, I was like, I don't want to build with this guy.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? And, but his scholarship in many ways is very well respected. I want to let that be known too. But so, yeah, those weirdo essays, like this gets into other kind of weird shit from that era. That whole thing floats around, man. And you see in my book, there's even like Bob writes about a fucking weird ass experience that he has that he said spontaneously happens to him after, early acid trip or mushroom trip peyote trip. And, I wanted to just document things as a reporter. And, I gave Christina, his daughter, the last word on that, because like, if you got to think about this fucking creepy, weird shit, there is like this weird gradient thing. Yeah. Like, there's stories, as you guys, you're hip hop heads, there's plenty of stories now about, well, first you got Diddy, a lot of stories about that. And then you got Bambaataa, who's never been put on trial yet, but there's tons of you got Hassan Campbell talking about how Bambaataa was basically thigh raping like young men. This is one of the fucking pillars of hip hop, right? That's a hard fucking thing to accept and be like, what the fuck, bro? I built with Bambaataa. I went to the Zulu radio show. You know what I mean? Like Bambaataa was a cool ass dude when I was, but then after all that, I was like, yo, I can't even.
Yeah.
This is disgusting. You know what I mean? Like, and but so like these weird gradients and stuff, you got those types of stories. But with the Peter Lamborn Wilson stuff, is like no one's ever come out and said Peter Lamborn Wilson did this to me, et cetera, et cetera. There's just these weird, creepy fucking essays, like mixed in with these really interesting, what they call like type 3 anarchism essays, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so, you know, getting onto this kind of topic, Lamborn Wilson was a publisher of like semiotics, but he was out there in New York. Some troll tried to like be like, oh, hit me up about this, and be like, yo, Lamborn Wilson and Robert Anton Wilson were good friends, man. So guilt by association. And it's like, well, it just goes back to the same thing with like Kerry Thornley. Like, how often did these two Wilsons hang out? You know, like, they spoke at a fucking conference together that Joseph Matheny put together. They wrote blurbs for each other's books because there's like, hey, this guy's saying cool anarchist shit. Yeah, I'll give you a blurb. You know what I mean? But how deep of a read sometimes? And that's they all missed that. Wilson missed that. You know, and others of that generation, they all missed that. That is on them. That's on Bob for not seeing like, whoa, I like this essay, Peter, but what is this shit that you're talking about here? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, that's what's come. I think that's what's around this era of discussion.
But at the same time, how accessible was what, you know, the counter stuff? How could he have seen it all? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, was he like what like, because he's the type of guy that would get like a pre-publication copy of something, or like you know, something like, did he actually read the book and flip through it and like see that passage, or did he get like, you know, one that contained like a pre-publication copy that didn't contain that yet? Because like, you know, when you're in that milieu, like I have friends who send me, you know, their books that, you know, hey, this is like my first draft of this, let me know about it. And I read it, and then like when it comes out, there's stuff added to it that I didn't read in the unit. So like, you know,
it's good
and it's nothing crazy like this or anything like that. I'm saying like, oh, like I would have loved to have read that poem before you put it in your book. That would have been awesome. I would have given you some, you know, like that would have been my favorite poem out of all of them. But like I told you this was my favorite, you know, like that kind of thing, you know, like.
Well, to answer that question in a way, it's like someone else who knew him, and also a super interesting artist and great writer, Joseph Matheny, the creator of the Ong's Hat story, which is the first official conspiracy theory of the internet. And he just released a revamp of that called Ong's Hat Complete. So I'll give that a shout out.
Hell yeah.
Matheny was the guy who organized this kind of legendary conference at the time of Bob, Peter Lamborn Wilson, and then Bill Bresney, who wrote a book called Pronoia, to all speak at this thing, and made a really cool video of it. But Matheny knew Lamborn Wilson probably more than Bob knew Lamborn Wilson, maybe, right? And I interviewed Matheny a number of times on this, and he was like, dude, I didn't, it just went right past me. I didn't even, that was not the pronounced thing when, you know what I mean? So, and he was like, yeah, I was pissed off, was his response, you know, reading those articles too, like that I knew this guy, and that what the hell, you know, like, so I think it's a controversial and sore part of this whole counterculture narrative, man. Like, and it's an area that I've talked about in other interviews, and we don't have to get too deep into it here, but just knowing that when doing a history of the counterculture, man, like there was people encountering some weird, creepy shit from the good guys, if you will, quote unquote, the good guys. Yeah. But that wasn't, learning about Bambaataa stuff. And the Bambaataa story broke in 2016 with Hassan Campbell and others speaking up. But I heard about Bambaataa in 2013 from like a Zulu Nation, like homie, like I was going to join Zulu Nation. Right. And they told me, let's chill a little bit. Maybe don't do that right now. And then my friend told me like why. And his story was someone they knew and grew up with was basically allegedly like molested by Bambaataa, allegedly, and went crazy and ended up in like an insane asylum and then disappeared and came back. His whole life was ruined, and that this took time for this guy to say this, you know, and then my friend told me this. I was like, yo, that's fucked up. And he was building heavy with Bam and Zulu, and like, you know, and he explained to me one night where he got a cold stare from homeboy and being like, we good, you know? So this is part of the long rumor mill thing here, but hearsay, but this was real shit. This was like a source thing. So hearing that sort of stuff is like, damn, bro, this is fucked up. Like that this is a current too and all this shit. And how do you make sense of that? And I think that's part of this era now that was not sort of part of the conversation during Wilson's time of like, but if we're engaging with the help of the internet and the internet is like an extension of the human mind. So we're encountering shadows more and more. We are more connected than ever before. So sadly, we have to confront these things, but you know, those sorts of things, it isn't that like exists in all walks of human life. Anyone, you know, could be like an abuser of that sort, you know, and that's so meaning there's no one whatever group of people that are more inclined to like move like that. So, but that ties into bringing it back to my book in a way, like the notion that I write about with Reich's emotional plague, which that metaphor really influenced Bob throughout the course of his work. And Wilhelm Reich was a psychiatrist trained by Sigmund Freud. It was one of his, you know, star students, went on to do his own thing, wrote a number of books, but he was known for coming up with this idea of the emotional plague that came about roughly 4,500 or 6,000 years ago when something very traumatic happened to the Homo sapiens sapiens. And like this they started abusing their kids, basically, like physical, whatever, you know, or people got dumber basically through childhood abuse. And this became sort of like a poisonous pedagogy that has been passed on for millennia, you know, and this struggle of emerging from what Reich calls the emotional plague, because it's an epigenetic phenomenon. For Reich, it's not the natural disposition of the human animal to be, you know, all angry and murderous, to want to kill people. That's a secondary drive when the primary drive is frustrated and the energetic flow of life doesn't get to go out like that. You know what I mean? People get very angry and murderous, you know, and this very much influenced Wilson throughout the course of his life and his career, that this idea that like humans have to learn to, again, like heal themselves and open themselves up again to really experience life fully. Like, so Reich also had a very, a phrase called character armor. There's a book that he wrote called Character Armor. Essentially, we have parts of our body that are frozen. I keep doing this. And like injuries are areas that we are like, we freeze off, like areas of our lower back. I don't try to think about it. I just got to work, but that shit gets worse and worse over time.
Yeah.
So Wilson had a huge experience with Reichian therapy in his early 20s, where the Reichian therapist, the orgone therapist, helped him reveal a sinus problem that he had since childhood, but he helped him make this connection through re-experiencing a traumatic experience, which was, as a child, so the nuns used to tell the kids that the devil poured ground glass in Job's eyes to make him blind. And this totally freaked young Bob out. Like these nuns they used to get off on like telling like fucking horror stories to these children, you know, about like how they're going to go to hell. And so Bob couldn't sleep, and he was an anxiety ridden child. He was already dealing with polio. Right. And for many years he had a bad sinus, you know, I wouldn't even call it an infection, but his sinuses were bad. But he credits this experience of Reichian therapy of helping him clear this sinus infection that never came back after this sort of, you know, body-centered therapy, you know, which basically involved, I don't know, his character armor broke. And character armor is you know, maintained through psychological dispositions, you know. And so for Reich, you know, it was basically all about like, you know, the breath of life. You know, it's kind of centers on just sort of breathing, really. Like, and observing, now this is my kind of extrapolation of this, but cycles of wind, it's a cycle, it's a cycle of wind, and breath moves through us as a cycle. But when it's impeded, we our backs get worse. When your back is locked up, you try to breathe into it and you fuck it up even more. You have to go to a chiropractor then to readjust it, right? And so that's a great part of that's one of the most inspiring parts of Wilson's work. And maybe one of the main inspirations for writing this book is Bob wrote about all these awesome, cool little ways of health, seeking to maintain your health psychologically, and then leave seeds for you to do it physically. Because he himself, he was not, the paragon of physical health. He was a chain smoker. He ate whatever. He had polio as a kid, had a bit of a pot belly all the time. But
a lot of Guinness.
Drank, during the, he took that on. And, but I just love, his mind is so still, I think he's thinking of the other people, man, in him fucking writing. He's like, yo, you can do it. It's not this. I read this sort of article the other day. I might write something about it, where this person is trying to place Leary, calling him like a space eugenicist, and it's sort of centering Leary as a main influence on people like Peter Thiel's idea of a breakaway civilization. And it's I think that's a little off. I think that's not quite the right connection. I don't even know if Peter Thiel has ever really read Timothy Leary and the Space Migration.
I doubt it. I mean, the real breakaway society came from Philip K. Dick and those type of dudes.
Came from Lucian first.
Well, Lucian first, right?
The satirist extraordinaire Lucian took his audience to the moon back when Jesus was walking around. Or the guy that they say that Jesus, whoever the fictional character that was Jesus was walking around. Lucian was there taking his audience to the moon. So the ancient, this returning to the Greeks kind of stuff takes you, and especially as satirists, can take you to that place where you can conceptually take your audience to the moon. Yeah. You know what I mean? So imagine how, how mind blown Lucian's audience would have been to be taken to the moon, when what they were used to being taken was, to the Black Sea for the Argonauts and back, or, with Hercules and the Odyssey. And
he got swallowed by a whale on the moon, and they had a whole fucking city in there. And the only way Lucian got out was he burned the city down, and the whale spit him out, and that's how they got home.
That's interesting, man.
It's so crazy, but it's this. It's literally the first
science fiction.
Science
fiction was invented by a satirist, and Lucian also invented the term esoteric, mocking the concept of exoteric. Which I know Raw makes that distinction, but I'm not sure if he knows that Lucian is the one that coined that term, the satirist that invented science fiction, right? It doesn't seem like a coincidence that this archetype kind of that Raw is very much the Lucian of his generation. You know what I mean? He was doing what Lucian did, and I don't know if he knew that Lucian did it before him. With the Discordian stuff, you have Eris and the Golden Apple. Lucian has his satirical retelling of the Judgment of Paris, which is where the Golden Apple comes from, right? So he doesn't explicitly mention it anywhere I can find. And I don't know, I'm judging by your reaction right now that Lucian is sort of a new name. I don't know if Raw doesn't talk about Lucian.
No,
so I sort of see how he's doing what Lucian did. It's almost like he was Lucian in a past life, and just it manifest in his time and just did what Lucian did. And Lucian's influence carried on way beyond his life. People have been referencing Lucian forever since Lucian wrote, right? And Lucian's so important to the history of satire that any satirist that calls himself a satirist that hasn't read Lucian, I kind of call your bluff a little bit. I'm like,
Mm.
you sure are you sure you're doing satire? Like, how do you not know Lucian? How do you not know Lucian did this?
Well, I
So
must
like,
admit that,
it could be one of
because
those.
I haven't encountered, again, like with Carl Ruck.
Yeah.
Wilson could have mentioned Lucian somewhere, but I'm not,
Yeah.
wasted high. But he might have. He credited Burroughs. I think Burroughs was his favorite satirist.
Yeah.
And he loved
Oh.
the quote that Burroughs used, and I'm sadly not going to get it correct, but it was like the beginning of one of his books. But it's like, where I go, I have no friend or foe, and
Right. Yeah.
like everyone gets to the chopping block. And Bob talks about that in an interview he did for Sounds True. Robert Anton Wilson explains everything, or Oh Bob exposes his ignorance. And like, I bought that fucking cassette right the day I saw him speak on December 4th, 2001 in San Francisco at the Renaissance Hotel. And I met him for the first time previously at the disinfo.com conference of 2000, February 2000. And at that time at the conference in New York City, which I write about in my book, Bob was standing, he was walking around. But when I saw him again, not long after that, he was in a wheelchair. And that was the first time I saw that he was in a wheelchair. And of course, I didn't know that the guy had post-polio attack or whatever. So I was like, oh shit. Because man, he got me, man. I mean, and this is the skill of being a great writer as a satirist, right? You could take someone to the moon. Like for him, Bob was the guy that convinced me that like it would be possible to live forever, like physical immortality. Because clearly remember reading Prometheus Rising, and I was in the library of the college I was going to. So I was able to get books that he was talking about, like the book, The Immortalist, et cetera, et cetera. And Bob's whole argument that we're going to live forever. First it's going to be 400 years and then it's going to be fucking forever. And like, again, it was just like reading Illuminatus trilogy. I was like, what are you talking about, man? Live forever, man. What the fuck are you talking about? But like, dude, that's just Bob's skill as a writer, communicating in a certain frequency that like I was already ready for, because he was already an influence on George Carlin. And I was watching George Carlin specials every year since I was a kid. All those George Carlin HBO
Me
specials.
too. I mean,
We had tickets to see George Carlin, but he died on the tour before, so they had to cancel the show. He wasn't able to do it after, obviously, for obvious reasons, to cancel the show. But like, yeah, we had tickets to see him, and he died, during that same tour.
It's kind of hilarious, man.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
I remember his last comedy special. At the time, I was like, wow, this is a different George. He's very obscene. And like looking back now, I think that's one of his funniest fucking like
I
comedy.
agree. Yes, I agree.
You saw it all coming. But well, little did I know watching these specials as a kid that, Bob and Carlin are already friends. Carlin is one of Bob's first generation fans. Like Carlin discovers Wilson's work around 1959 or 1960.
Wait, so Carlin discovers Bob.
Yeah.
Bob
Before
already
Carlin
met
has
him.
this huge sort of revolutionary transformation into the George Carlin that we knew.
Because to me, Carlin, it's literally Carlin. There's, like I can
Everybody, Carlin's up top.
Carlin is
Fire.
number
Yeah.
one to me. Like to me, it's Carlin.
Yeah.
You
Robert
know?
Anton Wilson is a direct influence on.
When you said that with
Carlin.
the other people who wrote the forward to your book, like
You keep
I was
is
like,
this a bit?
no, it's
is
not
this
a bit. I can't remember the names.
I would just admit it. Just yes and me once, please.
What?
Yes and.
Yes,
I know.
and-
Just take a single improv class. Johnny.
yes,
You'll be
and
so
those
much-
guys.
You'll be so much better at interviews if you take
Those
a
guys
single
with the
improv
rose-colored
class.
glasses, they were fucking hilarious to watch.
Yeah, they were funny.
Bro, I was watching this like, what am I watching? They're in their, I don't know, they're older dudes, and I was like, fuck,
Yeah.
this is, holy shit, this is hilarious to watch.
Was that the first time you encountered
Yes.
Doug and Grant?
You? That's
awesome.
that's how I encountered you, and everything, because I bought your book, and then I was like, let me just fucking figure this guy out before I talk to him,
Yeah.
and
Pretty wise.
yeah, good idea. But
I think you did the same.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did.
Who's this random Mandy guy that keeps trolling me in my comments?
this-
Turns out we have mutual friends.
we all have mutual friends. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
So crazy.
But you know, that's sort of like this notion of the golden thread, if you will, this generational constant passing of the torch or the message, you know, passing it on, like, because like it's so wild. Yeah, I guess it's true though to hear, you know, Grant and Doug described as like these old guys, because like I encountered them for the first time at the Disinfo conference in 2000, and I was like, who the fuck are these guys? You know, like, because at Morrison, he spoke later in the day. And so that crowd was Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City. You know where Hammerstein Ballroom is, I'm sure, right?
I think so, yeah.
Right across from Madison Square Garden. Yep. Yeah. And but that's still a venue, like smoking weed and shit, especially that time, they would kick you the fuck out. Rawheads didn't give a fuck. People smoking outside, smoking inside. Like, and Richard Metzger was the guy who put that all together, right? And like he went all out, man. He put together a really great lineup of speakers and performers and whatnot. But he made sure that there was absinthe there, right? And I believe the absinthe was free. And that was like the first and only time I really ever drank absinthe. And so in the basement of the Hammerstein, that was like the chill out area. So that was the first time I ever approached Robert Anton Wilson. He was standing at the bar. And he turned around. And I was like, "Oh shit!" Kind of like Mandy, you're talking about, like being like, "Huh?" And I was like, "Hey, I just want to say what's up. I think you're great." And he was like, like, you know, said some nice words to me, and I was like, "Oh shit, yes!" And this guy, I did it. But I brought my book, Illuminatus trilogy, for him to sign, and you know, I got it signed eventually throughout, you know, later that day or whatever. Like, but the whole fucking thing though was like this great kind of introduction to the next generation, right? And at that time, the next generation was like Grant Morrison was representing the you know, the UK invasion of you know, comic book writers that brought the whole fucking thing forward. All those guys and ladies from the UK and Ireland and Northern Ireland and whatnot. And then Rushkoff is like the next generation of. He wrote a book at that time called Coercion, which that was the first book of Rushkoff's that I read, and it blew my mind because he took the thread of how Wilson broke down bullshit and how Wilson went into propaganda and broke all that down. And Coercion was this chapter by chapter breakdown of how all these different sort of institutions work to like coerce you. Like coercion is the exchange where someone doesn't persuade you through reason and rationality, and through your own agency and free will, you do what they're asking you to do. Coercion is they like hypnotize you in some way, and all of a sudden you're fucking doing this. They brainwash you in some way. And so that book by Rushkoff was really like a great introduction to his work for me. And I kind of stayed in touch with Doug over the years, and he became like bigger and bigger as like an awesome writer. And then Morrison, I reached out to years later in 2017 during the writing of the book, or I think it was around 2017. And that was a cool fucking story, man, because like I said earlier, there were a lot of generous people with their time talking on the phone or via email interviews. Morrison was the only like person who was like, "Yeah, man, yeah, I'll be in town. I'll be in New York like in a few weeks. Like, let's link up, like, you know, and you'll interview me then." And that interview was nice because I was able to publish that on Mondo 2000 at the time. That was Are You Serious's website, and it was a 2-part interview. I've since put it out on my own page on Medium, so I recommend people reading that. And but it was there that Morrison sort of introduces himself into the storyline of the process of writing the book itself, because I felt like there were a lot of people I felt rooting for me to really make this book as special as possible, because those people who were like friends with Bob, especially the later years of his life, like people like David J. Brown or Val Corral or Mimi Peleg, or a number of people, you know, like who their friend Robert Anton Wilson was like a really chill, nice, supportive, cool old guy. Like David J. Brown talked about, he's a writer who, you know, as a writer, you're going to struggle financially, right? And when he was going through a hard time, he got a check that covered his rent for the month from Robert Anton Wilson. You know what I mean? Like, and Robert Anton Wilson struggled financially, but that's what that generation had. That does this generation have that right now? Because we've been like 20 years of the internet all about atomatizing people, and fucking like Bob and all them. They were social. Shit was social. They were meeting our IRL. You know what I mean? And now, especially since COVID, increasingly atomatized, right? And so one other reason why I wrote this book, like, let's study the map from not that long ago to apply where we're currently at in this interesting game of Chapel Perilous, and the importance of discovering, the cool old guys and cool old ladies, etc., who were there before, and yeah, man, to me, all of them are fucking forever young, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, because the message is fresh, the message is young, the message is like, don't fucking limit yourself and don't limit the world. Like, live as mythically as possible, but don't be a douchebag. Don't become Elon Musk.
Hey man, that was absolutely amazing. I just want to point out that we're coming on 3 hours. I don't know how much more time you have, because I can, like I said, I can literally do this all night. I don't know how much more energy you have. I just want to throw that one out there. Do you have any like closing thoughts, like 3 takeaways that you want to drive home to, the audience? Also, let them know where they can get the book. Do you have like a web store where they can get a signed copy, that sort of thing? Because we do that with our book, where we have they can go to my brother's store, we will sign a copy of it and send it out to them, and we give a donation to Hip Hop for the Homeless and all of that stuff. So not to cut you off, I can keep going.
No,
what I mean? I'm not just pointing, just throwing that out there, because
you brought that up. It's like, this was a nice conversation.
It was awesome, dude. I'm just,
hey man,
it was great,
fucking crazy.
And that was absolutely awesome. Where you left it. I just want to
sure
toss that one out there.
Takeaways, man. Basically, like, this is a book about a specific guy, but it's a book about like engaging with the world today as an artist, and what you might encounter along the way. It's going to be a Chapel Perilous, life now for people who walk the well-beaten path, if you will, who took the what seemingly solid job, is totally perilous now, right, in this current moment. So we're all walking this perilous path, right? Like, and it's good to study and listen to people who did it themselves. And why is Wilson meaningful? Because he created artifacts. We're talking about him right now, and not about something crazy, but about like these nice like things that he created with his mind that feeds the minds of the people who read it. So I just want to make that clear. Like, this biography is not just a specific biography about a person. It's about also biography about like America and Europe over the course of the 20th century. Like, this is something I think a lot of people could dig their heels into and enjoy. You could get the book at my website, chapelperilous.us. And yeah, hit me up about signed copies, most definitely. And also you could go to amazon.com or Lulu Press, which I recommend. Lulu Press. Actually, I recommend the printing in Lulu Press. The font is more it's a stronger font. It's not as faded. Like,
right.
Okay.
And also, yeah, man, my Substack, GabrielPatrickKennedy.substack, my Medium page, Gabriel Kennedy Media, whatever Medium is. And yeah, Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. That's the book. And thank you guys for having me, man. It was really nice talking raw with you guys.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. When we set this up, I had no idea that we had so many mutual friends. And
no idea.
It's just like it's either serendipitous or a coincidence or some other rhyming word.
It's super weird.
Those are forced rhymes, but I'm gonna be the first rapper to rhyme serendipitous with coincidence.
Ooh,
just like
good.
I was the first
like
rapper to use the word apropos in a rap song. So anyway, man, this was absolutely awesome. Send us those links so that when Skobie posts this, we'll have them all in the live stream, and we'll let you know when this goes live so that you can come hang out in the live chat with our audience and stuff. The book is Chapel Perilous. Boom. That's what it looks like. It's that thick.
Super thick.
you can get a copy of the Towel of Minerva while you're at it.
There you go.
And it's been 3 hours. Hail Eris.
Nice.
Look at that. That's when you stop it, Johnny. This is when you stop, Johnny. No. Here, it's funnier if you. Did we?